the issues. For my part, the part of my party and this government, we want to work constructively with deputies on all sides of the House. You know that in the opposition, because as recently as last week, while the shouting and roaring was going on in this House, I invited leaders of the opposition to come to a briefing with my department officials, specifically on the issue of trade and tariffs, suggested by Deputy Batchik. We'll be providing further updates on a regular basis as we need to pull together, because this is a moment. The hard reality is dawning. The time for shouting, hooping and hollering is over. We need to put our shoulder to the wheel, and we need to push in one direction. So I want to work with everybody on all sides of this House. There is no monopoly on good ideas. We need constructive ideas. We need constructive proposals. Can I say, Laskin Corla, I firmly believe that every politician who puts their name on a ballot paper and got elected to this House deserves to have their voice heard. Deciding to enter public life is not easy. It means long hours, times away from your family, a high tolerance for criticism. Politics is probably the most denigrated profession in the country. And I've always felt this was unfair, because I firmly believe the vast majority of people enter public life for the right reasons. Every day we're fortunate to come into this House and represent to the best of our ability the people who elect us. We do so knowing that the atmosphere may become charged, debates may become difficult, party politics can sometimes take precedence. However, Laskin Corla, there are another group of people who have the honour and responsibility of standing alongside us in this chamber and this House. Without them, this place would simply not function. The Clerk of the Dáil, his team, the ushers in this House, the many officials who work in Leinster House. Last week, they went about their work with diligence, and they were subjected to a bitter and aggressive cacophony and an atmosphere of hostility and anger. It was utterly unacceptable. It was utterly embarrassing, and I would call on those who engaged in such behaviour to apologise to the staff of this House, and in the words of the Clerk, the staff who endured a very difficult day. Separately, we had the appalling situation where ushers had to intervene between two members of this House. It isn't good enough. It isn't what the people expect from us. We can disagree, but never ever should Dáil Éireann descend to the levels of disrespect and discourtesy which have been on display in recent times. We're letting ourselves collectively down. The Ceann Comhairle was elected to do a job, without fear, without favour. Not so long ago, the opposition sought the Ceann Comhairle's intervention in a moment of dispute. She intervened. She found in your favour. The Ceann Comhairle then, hang on, calm down again. The Ceann Comhairle then oversaw a subsequent debate for 20 hours at a Dáil Reform Committee. A proposal was put to a vote at the committee. It was approved by a majority, which is how democracy works. But this time the opposition, this time the opposition didn't like the result. So what did they do? They come for the Ceann Comhairle's head. This is straight out of a populist playbook. If you don't like the answer, attack a person's integrity, attack a person's motive, and inevitably seek their head. Fine Gael has had differences with the Ceann Comhairle over the years. They're well documented, and I'm sure we will again. But we respect her mandate, and we respect the difficult job she has to do. This is a democracy. This is Dáil Éireann. It's our national parliament. And I hope, for once and for all, when this confidence motion is voted on, the outcome of which is clear to the dogs on the street, we can get on with actually doing the business of serving the people of this country, because there is no more time to waste.
Deputy Mary Go-McDonald.
Ceann Comhairle. This motion of no confidence in the Ceann Comhairle is a response to a concerted and coordinated plan by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. A plan to run roughshod over the democratic rules of the Dáil for their own political gain. Last Tuesday, not alone did the Ceann Comhairle put herself at the centre of that government plan, she led the charge. In an unprecedented and frankly breathtaking display of bias, the person charged with safeguarding and preserving democracy in this House helped to tear it apart. The Ceann Comhairle actively and enthusiastically fulfilled the bidding and the aims of the government, acting not as the impartial chair of the Dáil, but more like a loyal minister under political instruction from the top, acting as the government's Ceann Comhairle, signed, sealed and delivered by Michael Lowry. What we witnessed was an unrivalled partisan display. The Ceann Comhairle forced the government agenda, showing blatant disrespect and contempt for the mandate of the combined opposition. In forcing through the government's plan, Verona Murphy took a wrecking ball to the long-established democratic procedures of the Dáil, ripped up the rule book that underpins its functioning. And yes, this marked a fundamental departure from established practice, making a mockery of the oath taken by the Ceann Comhairle on assuming office. Political clashes, robust debate and raised temperatures are all part and parcel of parliamentary politics. We're all used to such battles in this chamber. However, the Dáil has always functioned through agreement by ensuring that opposition views, objections or dissent to the content of Dáil business is respectfully given its rightful place. And this isn't a mere technicality. This is fundamental to how opposition hold government to account for their priorities, their legislative agenda and their failures and shortfalls in addressing public need. It's also crucially how we endeavour to ensure political balance, so that the Dáil doesn't become a token platform for government to railroad through its agenda, but rather a place where those elected by the people exercise our duty to keep those in power in check through fair, honest and open debate. It's how accountability is ensured and the interests of the people are protected. Last Tuesday, the Ceann Comhairle not only undermined that democratic understanding, she demolished it. In quick succession, she made 3 decisions exposing bias, doing things in her power and, frankly, outside of her power to ram through the government's objective of changing the rules of the Dáil to suit themselves. Firstly, she failed to hold a vote to agree Dáil business when a vote was called. The call for vote Dáil is clearly audible in the Oireachtas footage of proceedings, and a division should have been called as a result. Yet the Ceann Comhairle ignored this call, dug in and proceeded to shut down the opposition. Secondly, the Ceann Comhairle chose to cancel questions on promised legislation. The claim that this decision was made because of continued disruption in the Dáil is demonstrably not true. The claim is clearly contradicted by the official Oireachtas video. The video shows that at the resumption, following a 30-minute suspension, there was no disruption in the Dáil. The Ceann Comhairle was simply hell-bent on rushing ahead to get the government's plan over the line. Dáil business was dispensed with to achieve the government's desired outcome. And thirdly, the Ceann Comhairle failed to put the government motion to change Dáil rules to a vote. Such was the haste to pass the government motion, the Ceann Comhairle inadvertently moved the opposition amendment only. At no point did the Ceann Comhairle put the government's substantive motion to a formal vote. In her eagerness to get the job done for Micheál Martin, Simon Harris and Michael Lowry, the Ceann Comhairle declared the government motion to be passed, a motion on which there was no vote. That is astonishing. And of course, all of this was done to cheers of approval and a chorus of encouragement from the government benches. The only holy show on display was the shameless coordination and cooperation between the Ceann Comhairle and the government. Brazen, arrogant and on display for all to see. So all of this is very serious. Yes, Taoiseach, unseen in any previous Dáil. Change for the worse, and yes, deeply destructive. A change designed and orchestrated by you and your government. The failures of the Ceann Comhairle last week raised questions about the legitimacy and legal standing of the business conducted last week in the Dáil, because the rules of the Dáil have not been legitimately changed. Therefore, the farce of others' questions scheduled to commence tomorrow has no standing. The credibility of the Dáil, The democratic underpinnings of this Parliament have been undermined by the actions of the Ceann Comhairle at the behest of the Government. And to ignore this reality would make a mockery of our mandate and take the people for fools. So the position of the Ceann Comhairle is untenable. Surviving a vote on this motion will not change that fact. The role of the Ceann Comhairle demands that whomsoever occupies the office be impartial, fair and independent. You cannot be a fair, impartial, independent chairperson of the Dáil, having thrown out the democratic rulebook to force through whatever Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil want. If you cast aside the need for balance and the rights of the opposition and our mandates to do the bidding of government, we in opposition would be doing the people of Ireland a grave disservice were we to lie down and accept such a farce. The actions of the Ceann Comhairle have been neither impartial nor independent, quite the opposite. The credibility of the Ceann Comhairle now lies in tatters, having lost the confidence of the opposition. For the Ceann Comhairle to fulfil their duties, they must enjoy the confidence of both government and opposition. Teachta Murphy does not and must go. Tá an Ceann Comhairle tar éis a léiriú lena gníomh nach bhfuil sí corrum, nav cléanta nó nav splách. An teachtain sicáide chuir sí rialacha déanlacha na Dáil faoina cosa chun plán an rialtas a curí gríoch, chun an sucrú suúrach le Michael Lowry a cosint. Tá praseach déanta aci de bhhuinín an rasúra go léir, caithfidh sí imacht. So, cui bono, who benefits? It must be remembered that all of this is rooted in the grubby deal struck between Micheál Martin, Simon Harris and Michael Lowry. A deal in which Deputy Lowry led and marshalled a group of so-called independent TDs into the Fianna Fáil Fine Gael camp to form a government. The Lowry group of TDs negotiated, helped to write and agree the programme for government. 4 of their number assumed ministerial office. They designated themselves as government TDs by their own actions. And those dogs on the street know that they are in the government camp, on the government side. But the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have sought to orchestrate a delusion that they were members of the opposition. And we've said it many times, and let me say it again today, you simply cannot be in government and opposition at the same time. However, this is the very farce that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael want to ram through to protect their grubby deal with Michael Lowry. So what's in this deal? Notably, and again today, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have been very, very coy on this point. So we'll have to rely on Deputy Lowry himself, in his own words, to tell us. This is what he had to say in an interview at Tipperary Live in January. He makes it clear that putting Verona Murphy in as Ceann Comhairle was key to the deal. Here's his words. Let me quote. I felt it was a good political move to make, to put forward Verona Murphy as Ceann Comhairle. And that was really an important and decisive moment, because I felt that once she was elected as Ceann Comhairle, and there had to be a lot of political manoeuvring to make that happen, but once she was elected as Ceann Comhairle, then that put our regional group in the driving seat for discussions on the formation of a government. He went on to say, and let me quote, I've been working first of all to get Verona Murphy elected as Ceann Comhairle, and then to prepare our group's policy position and the policy platform in readiness for negotiations. And then we started negotiations. I was the lead negotiator with relation to that. I think we achieved a fantastic result for our group in that we had a Ceann Comhairle, 2 super junior ministers and 2 junior ministers. So there you have it. Directly, as they might say, from the horse's mouth. The grubby deal. A raft of junior ministers with big pay hikes, more super junior ministers, and, of course, the prized position of Ceann Comhairle to boot. And nobody with any respect for the position of Ceann Comhairle, would ever have been party to such a disgraceful arrangement. A deal struck by Micheál Martin and Simon Harris with Michael Lowry, a man whose actions the Moriarty Tribunal found to be, and I quote, profoundly corrupt to a degree that is breathtaking, who the Taoiseach once described as a rogue politician who called on him to resign his seat, now kingmaker of your coalition. A grubby deal that places Michael Lowry's demands above even the democracy of the Dáil and the proper functioning of Parliament. A grubby deal that has been prioritised by this government over the formation of Oireachtas committees, over the imperative to put forward debate and pass laws, over the need to address big issues affecting workers and families. All of this might again beg the question, what does Michael Lowry have over Micheál Martin, or Simon Harris for that matter? What debt is owed to him that you are willing to tear down the integrity of the Dáil just to keep him sweet? We know that providing him with access to the main platform where the opposition holds government to account was part of your grubby deal. And tomorrow, you plan the ludicrous spectacle of Lowry Group TDs standing up at leaders' questions to question the government they support, that they designed and that they delivered. Of course, Micheál Martin was adamant that this was about ensuring fair speaking time for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael backbenchers. Well, that bubble has truly burst. This isn't about backbenchers, it never was. This is about Michael Lowry. The reality is that the Lowry group of TDs get 4 times more speaking time than Fianna Fáil backbenchers. So just as Micheál Martin spent his first term as Taoiseach throwing Fianna Fáil ministers under the bus to protect his deal with Fine Gael, now in his second term he throws Fianna Fáil backbenchers under the bus to protect his grubby deal with Michael Lowry. The Taoiseach has claimed that the Dáil will never be the same again, and I agree. But not because the opposition is standing our ground, but because of his underhanded manoeuvres to rig the Dáil and stack the opposition in his favour. That's the threat that's faced here, and it certainly has some resonance with events elsewhere in the world. If anybody ever wondered why governments come and go but nothing really improves for working people, well, you have your answer here in a nutshell. The deals, insider deals, the cosy club. That's the reason why so many people can't afford a roof over their head, why our hospitals are overcrowded and overwhelmed, why children with special needs are locked out of services and education, why families struggle to make ends meet. These deals preserve the status quo and ensure that workers and families are pushed to the back of the queue. This is the deal that the Ceann Comhairle moved heaven and earth to defend last Tuesday. The very deal that secured the position is that it was Michael Lowry who ensured that she would become Ceann Comhairle. In her acceptance speech, Teachta Murphy openly acknowledged Michael Lowry's efforts, identifying him as the person who first approached her to seek the office of Ceann Comhairle. And despite deep reservations, she was given a fair wind when she assumed that office. But last Tuesday, our worst fears were realised. She became the government's Ceann Comhairle. Michael Lowry gives 2 fingers to the Irish people. We will not accept the Ceann Comhairle doing the same. The Ceann Comhairle is not fair, is not impartial, is not independent and cannot stay. The Ceann Comhairle must go.
The office of Ceann Comhairle has been dragged into a mess of the government's making. Her position has become untenable because of a deal between the government and Michael Lowry and his group. And the big question is why? Why is the government willing to go to such lengths to facilitate Mr Lowry? Why do they insist that you can be in government and in opposition at the same time, all for Mr Lowry? None of us know why. Mr Lowry is certainly not saying. He's showing everyone the 2 fingers. None of us know what's in the secret grubby deal the government negotiated with Michael Lowry. We do know it included the very office of Ceann Comhairle. And so here we are at this impasse. The last thing any of us wanted in the Labour Party, because throughout my career I've been proud to work constructively and collaboratively, and that's what Labour activists do. In the Dáil, the Seanad, the European Parliament, on our councils and in our communities, we use our voices to raise the issues that matter on housing, healthcare, climate, on jobs, on the cost of living. And on the eve of Trump's tariffs, in the threat of a global Trump slump, this is a time to work constructively, to address these issues. I'm glad we've been able to do that in the past few weeks, but undoubtedly, much attention has been focused on the ludicrous Lowry affair, and regrettably, it has now culminated in the dragging into the picture of the Ceann Comhairle's office. And we in Labour worked hard to find a resolution to this from the start. The Taoiseach has left, but he will recall that I approached him and the Taoiseach very early on in the process, directly here in the Chamber, seeking to find a resolution. This was rejected by both Taoiseach and Taoiseach initially. I'm glad to say we did then all come together, all the leaders of all the parties. We did reach an agreement in good faith. It was read out into the Dáil record by the former government chief whip, Hildegard Naughton, saying the government will work to secure agreement acceptable to government and opposition on this matter. Who reneged on that deal? It wasn't the Labour Party, it wasn't any opposition party, it was the government. And a number of concerns arise as a result of the ramming through of the change to standing orders that the government insisted on putting forward. First, we see an unacceptable outcome where the Lowry lads and lassie are now to be regarded as being on both sides of the fence, in a cynical manner, to be occupying both government and opposition benches, and in some cases moving benches to and fro. Secondly, the government has sought to create this sham set piece. We're going to see it tomorrow, a new other members' question slot, a sort of theatrical government TD's parliamentary party meeting in public. And a parliamentary party meeting in private would certainly be a lot more critical of government ministers than I think we're likely to see tomorrow. And finally, we saw a manner in which the government and Ceann Comhairle rammed through changes last week in a way that's simply not acceptable. Deeply frustrating through this saga has been the attitude of the Taoiseach, becoming increasingly tetchy, patronising opposition leaders, accusing us of subverting democracy, even of being arsonists today. Getting deeply offended if we question his motivations, insisting this is really about a change to benefit government backbenchers and give them more speaking time. But the reality is government backbenchers will lose out. Other members' questions are being introduced at the expense of Taoiseach's questions on Wednesday, a slot which is now, we saw it today, being used by backbenchers lobbying for junior ministry, queuing up to tell the Taoiseach how great he is and what a great job he's doing. The Taoiseach has changed his view on Dáil reform. He went back through some selective memories about the Labour Party. Well, let me remind the Taoiseach that in 2016, after the February general election, he made Dáil reform a condition of government formation, saying there should be a major limit on the ability of government to control all business on an ongoing basis. Fianna Fáil at the time produced a paper on Dáil reform saying, freeing the Oireachtas from the absolute control of government is the single most important reform required. Well, how things have changed. And what has the Taoiseach done? He's got a secret deal with the Lowry Group, and all these great principles have gone out the window. He's overturned decades of parliamentary precedent and created a noxious environment. He wants to attack the Labour Party because we happen to agree with all the parties in opposition on this issue. And this attack is unwarranted. Other parties have their own histories, but I'm proud to lead a party that has for more than a century worked to uphold the highest standards in public office. We have an unbroken record of holding ourselves to the highest ethical standards. The Taoiseach can't say the same of his own party. When it comes to ethics, it's not the Labour Party who's negotiated a deal with a convicted offender who has been named by a tribunal as being profoundly corrupt. Members of Lowry's own group won't even sit beside him. But Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will stop at nothing to defend him and his deal. And as I've said, regrettably, the Ceann Comhairle's office has been drawn into this. The Ceann Comhairle should enjoy bipartisan support. Under standing orders, she must apply the rules in an impartial and fair manner. But last Tuesday, she deemed the order of business passed without a vote, despite clear objections from opposition benches. In other words, she caused business to be carried out without legitimate democratic basis and went on to ensure that the standing order change was rammed through in a highly contested process. And for that reason, with deep regret, We in Labour do consider her position is no longer tenable, and that's why we have signed the amendment to this motion, and that's why we will vote accordingly this evening. As Democrats, once that vote is held, of course we will accept its outcome. But the government may win the vote, but we've won the argument. People see through this farce, and the responsibility for that lies with government. And this will be the lasting legacy of Micheál Martin on Dáil reform: a noxious environment in the chamber, a breakdown in relationships, and two fingers from Michael Lowry. The well of goodwill has been well and truly poisoned, and all efforts to reach a resolution in good faith were rebuffed by government on this. This is a mess of your making.
Deputy Hare.
It's a disheartening thing to see a stroke happening in real time in front of our eyes in this chamber, and it's a disheartening thing to have to speak on a motion of confidence in the Ceann Comhairle at all, but particularly so early in this Dáil term, and indeed in my own Dáil career. But this motion, this issue of confidence before us today, goes back to my very first day as a TD in Dáil Éireann last December, and the deal that was arranged between this government and Michael Lowry. In return for support in good times and bad, the Ceann Comhairle was appointed from among the ranks of independent TDs led by Deputy Lowry, and other goodies were bestowed on his followers, including junior ministries, deputy whip responsibilities, goodies for particular constituencies, and an open door with ministers. Now, it's entirely regrettable that the office of Ceann Comhairle has been used as a bargaining chip in these government formation negotiations. Indeed, the quid pro quo regarding the Ceann Comhairle was sealed with Michael Lowry and voted on in this House at the same time that the government was purporting to speak with the Labour Party and others in opposition about possible government formation. It was a joke, and that made it abundantly clear to us that they had no genuine intention of anything other than ever doing a deal with Michael Lowry. The state, as we all know, has spent vast sums investing the corrupt dealings of the Ceann Comhairle's political patron. He has received a mandate, we do not dispute that, but that mandate does not whitewash his past or mean that we can or should ignore the Moriarty Tribunal finding that he engaged in profound corruption to a degree nothing short of breathtaking. Nor should we ignore his resignation in disgrace as a minister and member of Fine Gael, or ignore the all-party, uncontested motion passed by this House that he is not fit for office and should resign as a TD. Nor should we ignore the words of the Taoiseach, with whom he has negotiated this grubby deal, that Michael Lowry is an insidious and pervasive influence who engaged in a cynical and venal abuse of office. This is someone who has had to enter tax settlements with the revenue in relation to businesses he runs, someone who is engaged in strategic litigation against public participation, seeking to use his wealth to silence dissenting voices through the courts when they call him out on his corruption. And what does this say to the Irish public? Well, it says, hey kids, don't worry, you can do what you want. Be as corrupt and as unaccountable as you want. You know, engage in tax fraud. Brazen it out for a few years. Deny, deny, deny. Never apologise, never engage in any self-reflection, and God help us, don't even consider any self-improvement. It means you can waltz back into power and control of this country, aided and abetted by a government and other independent politicians who clearly don't give a damn about corruption and standards in politics. They'll welcome you back into the fold under the guise of political pragmatism. It is not lost on us that today is April Fool's Day, nor that yesterday saw the beginnings of a worldwide, far-right campaign to say that Marine Le Pen should suffer no consequences of the finding of corruption against her. This government is trying to take the Irish public for fools, but the public sees through this political stroke. Rehabilitating Michael Lowry and ignoring the very serious findings against him is an act of choice by this government and follows the grim line of denial of accountability internationally. We in Labour and across opposition are righteously angry at the government's grubby deal with Michael Lowry that saw the Ceann Comhairle appointed and logic turned on its head by government-supporting TDs being allowed to pretend to be in opposition so they can perform on social media. The deal demeans this House and our body politic. It demeans and undermines the office and independence of the Ceann Comhairle. The naked politicisation of the role of Ceann Comhairle leads those of us in opposition naturally to suspect the Ceann Comhairle will act in a partisan manner to support the government in order to support her own position. We gave the Ceann Comhairle the benefit of the doubt from the start, but the manner in which the business of this House was conducted last Tuesday fatally undermined our confidence in her, and it is with deep regret that I say that. I hope the Ceann Comhairle will reflect on this vote in a manner in which her political patron is seemingly incapable of,
Deputy,
But I don't
please
hold out much
conclude.
hope of that, given that she hasn't even turned
Please
up tonight.
conclude.
We will oppose the motion.
Minister Lyon.
Thank you very much, Lascan Corla. Lascan Corla, you can't on one hand stand up and make the case for the value of the rules of this House and at the same time attempt to shout them down. You can't do that. You can't on one hand talk about the value of the procedures of this House but be involved in heckling those who seek to implement them. You can't talk about respect of the office of the Count Corla but at the same time look to abuse her and the way she has performed her functions. And then finally, you can't make the case for the importance of the orderly functioning of democracy and attempt on two different occasions to disrupt that orderly functioning in the way this country has not seen and in the way this House has not seen. And that is at the heart of the fundamental inconsistency of the opposition here today. On one hand, they stand up and talk about the value of order, the value of procedure, but at the same time, it is the same opposition that have taken to their feet on two different occasions in a way that is without precedent in the history of this Dáil to disrupt its behaviour. You can't do both at once. You can't ride both horses together. I noted what Deputy MacDonald said earlier on, and again, this is the behaviour. The same people that are only too happy to heckle, to disrupt this House, are the same people that stand up and make charges against this government. Deputy MacDonald earlier on said the government, or indeed the Count Corla, was involved in behaviour, and I'm going to quote you, to tear democracy apart. Really? When you see the behaviour that is taking place elsewhere in the world that has that effect, how can you talk about the behaviour in the House in a way that is consistent with that? You allege the Count Corla demolished the rules of this House. Really? How can you substantiate that? And then perhaps most chillingly, you went on to say that the Count Corla's position is untenable and the outcome of the vote doesn't change that. Now, I don't happen to agree with Deputy Murphy too often, but in his brief appearance here earlier on, he put the question that there is more to democracy than majority rule, and he is, of course, correct. A vital element of in all of that is respect for rules, adherence to them, and adherence to them even when you might not agree. That is the bedrock upon which constitutional democracy in our state should function. And while there are issues that we will debate over time, to stand over here, to contest that there is behaviour underway where the Count Corla has not been impartial, does a disservice to the traditions that have served this state well.
Thank you. Minister Chambers.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. As we debate this motion, Ireland faces huge economic threats, and government is extensively planning for the impact of tariffs on the Irish economy, jobs and competitiveness. This should be the prime focus of all members on all sides of the House. Instead, we have found ourselves in this never-ending debate on speaking rights, which has been defined by vitriol, barracking, anger and obstruction, and a complete disregard and disrespect for the Count Corla and her office, the blocking of the election of a Taoiseach, the attempts to obstruct votes and shut down business, and the attempts to shout down the Count Corla which have taken place in recent weeks is an attempt to shift Ireland to a really destructive and divisive politics. And as a former government chief whip in the last term, I always valued how we did work together at the Business Committee to try and build consensus in the House where we could. And it's incumbent on all of us to work together to urgently restore a collegiate and constructive approach. In the last term, we often disagreed, but we were always able to find a way forward on many of the issues. And we know that through engagement, that is possible when it comes to all of the respective parties and groupies. And I think opposition whips need to reflect on this. It's incumbent on all of us to work urgently to restore what was there previously in the public interest. We urgently need to establish the Oireachtas committees to have pre-legislative scrutiny on many of the legislative priorities, which is an important piece of our parliamentary democracy, and give committees and all members across the House that opportunity to play an active and constructive role and to work collaboratively. Pure opposition politics should not trump the public interest, and we need to urgently restore mutual respect in this House. We need to restore respect for the office of the Count Corla, Verona Murphy, who has simply tried to apply the rules and the procedures agreed by this House in good faith. The economic threats we face require all of us to work together on behalf of the people in the public interest. And I believe today's vote needs to mark a turning point. We need a concerted effort to refocus and return to a more constructive, collaborative approach in the serious economic challenges that we will face as a country.
Thank you, Minister Donovan.
Thanks very much, Last Count Corla. For today's vote to be warranted in the Count Corla, one would have imagined that she would have done something wrong last week. Now, I was sitting in this seat as close to the Count Corla as the only other person who was in the front was the Taoiseach. So I had the benefit of hearing both the Chief Whip, the Taoiseach, in his efforts to try and be heard, and the Count Corla throughout all of it. The only people who couldn't hear what the Count Corla was saying was the people who were roaring and shouting at her in a scene that was resemblant of something that came out of Harcourt Street at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. A fair play to you, lads. And she was right. You were an absolute, total and utter disgrace. Grown men, for the most part, roaring and shouting at a constitutional officer. Now, of course, he never wanted her, so it's no surprise that you're putting down a motion of confidence in her. And this is playing out the election. This is playing out the election right from the start. I mean, we had all of the difficulties after the election trying to form a government. Some people wanted in, some people didn't really want to have in, and some people felt being in opposition was the most comfortable place that they could find. And then we had the leader of the opposition saying this is going to be opposition on all fronts right from the get-go. But the people who are most disappointed, I think, in this are the Labour Party. The Labour Party, please, just let me finish. You had a good run last week now. But of all parties, you should remember what was done to your former leader, Joan Burton, another woman who held a constitutional officer position, and who herself had to confront, I would say, the sort of behaviour not too dissimilar to what we saw, and you'll have your chance, Deputy Devine, in a minute, not too dissimilar to what happened in this chamber last week. Now, we're all, as parties, trying to encourage women into politics, but the one party that really disappointed me was that all of a sudden, the united leader of the opposition has emerged, and the Labour Party have just joined in as a kind of a silent little lamb. And in the process of doing that, and Deputy Batchick today gave a great oration about the importance of Ireland having a clear position with regard to trade and with regard to our position in the world. And what have the Labour Party and other parties done in here? Withdrawn pairs. This was always inevitable, Last Count Corla. Today's vote was always inevitable, because they couldn't accept the reality that a government has been formed and we want to get on and govern, and the main party opposite could never accept that, and now we have the two centre-left parties just coming along like mudflaps.
Minister, thank you, Minister Wallace.
Thank you, Last Count Corla. Last Count Corla, we stand at a precipice. The world is burning and the barbarians are at the gate. We face multiple existential crises. We have global instability in the Middle East, war in Ukraine, climate change, we have trade wars, we have tariffs, threats to the global economy. Tomorrow, we see the threats becoming real. And in this House, we watched aghast as Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers prorogued Parliament when they suspended the People's Assembly, denying that parliamentary procedure to take place. We watched in horror on January 6th when the Capitol rioters stormed the Washington DC to stop the election results being ratified. We never thought we'd see it in this House. We never thought we'd see it in our own democracy. And how apt is it that on April Fool's Day, the people that say they want to have serious debate waste yet another opportunity to put an afternoon dealing with this sort of farce when serious issues consume us. We're talking about 8 minutes of speaking time. And across the floor, we see three groups. We see the shout 'em down Shinners, yet again agitating, barracking anybody that stands or anything that stands in your way. I fundamentally believe you cannot accept the outcome of the last election. You couldn't accept the outcome of the one before that either, because in 2020 you went on a world tour proclaiming that you had actually won the election, despite the fact that you did not command a majority of the House. You lost the next election in 2024, the most effective opposition in the history of the state, was certainly the most hyped opposition in the history of the state, but it was also the greatest drop in support in the history of the state of any opposition party when you fell by 5.5%, and the greatest in half a century. We move on then to your junior partners on the benches beside you, and we look at the Labour Party, which is once again enthralled by a militant tendency, as we've taken the Labour Party, a party that was rooted in principle, that ran away from government, The first opportunity before an RTE microphone, when the last votes were still being counted, the Labour Party declared it wanted nothing to do with government, didn't want to be involved in that. What is the point in going before the people with a manifesto if you have no interest in implementing it? And then we have the social media Democrats. As your own recently resigned member, David McGinn, said recently, you are a fundamentally unserious party. Not my words, his. This is a serious crisis. We need serious players. The government provides that seriousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Higgins. Order, please.
Thank you very much, Lascan Corla. I rise to my feet today not in support of a particular individual, but in support of the sanctity of an office that upholds the most important thing any sovereign nation has, its democracy. We in this chamber elected in a fair and a free vote Deputy Verona Murphy as Ceann Comhairle as the 34th Dáil and as the first ever female Ceann Comhairle in the history of the state. And last week, we in this chamber took a vote, and if that vote was to be taken again, the outcome would be the same. And the outcome and respecting outcomes of votes is the very basis for a functioning democracy. The Ceann Comhairle has only sat in that chair for 22 Dáil sitting days, and in that time we've had 2 days of chaos, of obstruction, of ugliness and of disrespect, and of the exact opposite of a fair wind. And that cannot and it should not become the norm, because dignity and respect in the workplace has to extend to this chamber. Dramatics do not help our country and do not help our people. Opposition politics can't just be about headlines, it also has to be about the country and the nation's interests, and it's never been more important to buckle down and to get working on behalf of the people of Ireland to protect our future and our stability, to protect our jobs in the face of potential tariffs, to protect the taxes that support our most vulnerable, our older people, our children, those in need of healthcare and disability services, to protect our country's future. And despite the opposition's best efforts to destabilise government, ministers have been working to deliver on our programme for government commitments and to protect those jobs and to protect our economy in the face of global uncertainty. What we haven't been able to do is come before our Oireachtas committees, and that's something that I'm keen, and I know so many of our backbenchers are keen to get established. I fully support the mandate of our newly and our duly elected Ceann Comhairle to get a 24th Dáil day sitting in that chair and to continue to carry on her democratic duties to ensure the functioning of this Dáil chamber, as is all of our democratic duties.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy McLaughlin.
So the journalist of long standing, Sam Smith, wrote a really powerful article for The Currency. I'm sure if you haven't read it, you all should have read it. And at the end of that piece, he wrote, Lowry broke a sacred trust with Irish people as a government minister, as was repeatedly highlighted by the Moriarty Tribunal. And yet, after all this history, Lowry has re-emerged on the political stage as a would-be kingmaker. Now, Mary Lou MacDonald read into the record the comments of Michael Lowry to Tipperary Live, where he boasted that he had singly negotiated the elevation of Rona Murphy to the position of Ceann Comhairle. Micheál Martin was absolutely determined that the only partner he would have with Fine Gael would be Michael Lowry and his independents. He wasn't one bit interested in the talks with the Labour Party or the Social Democrats. He wasn't one bit interested. He was doggedly determined that it would be Michael Lowry and his team. This is how we got to this absolute mess that we're in. The Ceann Comhairle thanked Michael Lowry for putting her in place, but she also read out this declaration. She said, I will apply the rules as laid down by this House in an impartial and fair manner. Now, how on earth can anybody who watched the video on the Oireachtas website, and any citizen can watch, and write down word for word what you hear and note what you see, how can they look at the order of business that day, which was rammed through? Clearly a vote was called. Absolutely crystal clear. The Ceann Comhairle then came back after a recess and declared that under standing orders she was scrapping questions and promise legislation, and indeed a bill that was there from a government TD. just declared it was going. No huge uproar. Whenever she said that, that's when the uproar ensued. Again, just look at the video. It cannot be contested. But the most serious part of all is the motion itself, the motion to amend the standing orders. Because it's crystal clear that in her absolute haste to do the government's bidding, she actually passed an amendment to the motion. That is crystal clear. I challenge anybody in this House to watch that video, to write down what they hear and tell me anything different. So you know that motion was not passed. You know that the standing orders, a wrecking ball was driven through. All to get your way, all to see through the deal by Michael Lowry. And I think of Sam Smith, who was brave enough to take on Michael Lowry with his own livelihood challenged in a court of law. He tells his story. So shame on you for elevating Michael Lowry as a kingmaker, and shame on you for putting his nomination into the chair and driving a wrecking ball through our standing orders. You know it's wrong, and don't lecture us on morality when you do that.
Firstly, just to say the delay in setting up committees is completely on the government's side. We've been waiting for months for the government to bring forward proposals to establish committees. They must bring forward those proposals to Dáil reform for committees to be established. Should have been done months ago. We've been asking for months for this to be done, and there's no excuse for delays. And secondly, just to be very clear, that Social Democrats at Business Committee last week asked for time this week to be on tariffs. That was not agreed, and that was voted down again on the order of business today. So we should be putting time this week in the Dáil on the key issue of tariffs and Ireland's response. Last Count Corla, this is the first time in the history of the state that the Dáil has debated a confidence motion in the Count Corla, and I regret that this unprecedented motion is taking place today. But we've been led to this impasse by a government intent on bulldozing democratic norms to get a grubby deal with a corrupt politician over the line. This is the essence of why we are here. Last Tuesday, as the Dáil descended into chaos, one person sat there smiling and laughing. Michael Lowry was triumphant. And why wouldn't he be? He got exactly what he wanted. He got one of his group elected as Count Corla. He got another 4 appointed as junior ministers, including 2 super juniors. He secured opposition leader speaking rights. And he got influence over how public money in the National Development Plan and the HSE Capital Plan will be allocated. All of this for a politician who was found by the Moriarty Tribunal to be, and I quote, profoundly corrupt to a degree that was nothing short of breathtaking. Those on the government benches would clearly prefer to forget the findings of the Moriarty Tribunal, but they bear repeating. It found that Lowry, then Minister for Communications, delivered the state's second mobile phone licence for the businessman Dennis O'Brien. It said O'Brien later sought to confer a material benefit on Lowry. It also found that O'Brien transferred £477,000 to various Lowry-controlled accounts and supported Lowry in obtaining a £420,000 bank loan. Lowry also tried to use his influence to double the rental value of a building part-owned by businessman Ben Dunn. The building was leased to the then state-owned Telecom Éireann. In effect, the Minister of the day was attempting to gouge a state company he oversaw. If this attempt had succeeded, it would have doubled the value of Dunn's building from £5.4 million to £12.75 million. A nice little earner. There was also the £34,500 that Lowry pocketed, which had been designated by Dunn's as Christmas bonuses for his workers. Judge Michael Moriarty said this was one of Lowry's most reprehensible actions. Lowry doesn't like the findings of the tribunal being reported and discussed. He personally sued journalist Sam Smith for defamation for stating Lowry had been caught with his hand in the till. This action was notable because he declined to sue the media organisations that published the comments. Instead, he went after Smith alone, in a vindictive attempt to ruin the journalist whose reporting had first revealed his dodgy dealings. Ultimately, this attempt failed, with the High Court reiterating Lowry's documented tax fraud and the dig-outs he received from business friends. Nearly 14 years ago, exactly on the 29th of March 2011, Micheál Martin told it all that Fianna Fáil accepted the Moriarty findings of the tribunal. Back then, he called on Michael Lowry to resign his Dáil seat. Today, Micheál Martin and Simon Harris are part of the re-establishment of Michael Lowry, putting him at the heart of their government and bending over backwards to make him happy. Those are the facts. It didn't have to be like this. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael should have shown Michael Lowry the door. Instead, within weeks of the election, they identified Lowry as their preferred coalition partner. The first manifestation of this was the election of Ceann Comhairle on December 18th. The office of Ceann Comhairle should never have been gifted as part of this deal. It undermined years of Dáil reform and opened up the office to charges of bias. The introduction of a secret ballot was to ensure that the office of Ceann Comhairle would be truly independent. It was also to ensure that Ceann Comhairle had the confidence of both government and opposition. However, the Taoiseach and Taoiseach didn't hesitate in scuppering this. The instruction to government backbenchers to vote for an agreed candidate undermined this important reform. And so, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael cut a deal with a convicted tax cheat and corrupt politician. Incredibly, even now, Micheál Martin and Simon Harris deny there is any deal done with Lowry. And I accept there may be no written agreement and nothing transparent, but clearly a deal has been done. Lowry has stated that he will exercise influence over the National Development Plan and the HSE Capital Plan. How public money is allocated in these multi-billion euro plans will have a very real impact on people's lives. Special treatment for one constituency means deserving projects in other areas will not be funded. And when it comes to the HSE Capital Plan, this can literally mean the difference between life and death. Now, there should be no ambiguity about this. No nods, no winks, no deals behind closed doors. The Taoiseach who's left the chamber should answer the following questions. What influence will Michael Lowry have into the allocation of public money in the National Development Plan and the HSE Capital Plan? How will this influence be exercised? Will there be special treatment for requests from Michael Lowry? This is public money. We need transparency. The public have a right to know. The independence of the office of Ceann Comhairle was the first on the chopping block as part of the Lowry deal, but speaking rights quickly followed. Michael Lowry was clear from the outset that he would get opposition leader speaking rights, and that is exactly what Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have delivered for him. Last week, they broke their promise and rammed this through the Dáil. However, we expected fair procedures from the Ceann Comhairle. Since her appointments, the Social Democrats have worked with the Ceann Comhairle in good faith, and today I want to stress that we don't want to personalise this. But we cannot ignore what happened. A vote was called on the order of business, but that was ignored, and that is a fundamental breach of the democratic process. Now, there have been claims that calls for a vote were not audible given the din in the chamber. However, there is a vote on the order of business nearly every week, and is anyone seriously suggesting that the opposition looked happy last week with the order of business? Anyone simply glancing at the turmoil on the opposition benches would have known that last week's business was not agreed. This was abundantly clear. And anyone looking back at videos of Dáil proceedings can clearly hear a very audible vote all. That is what is at issue, and it's for this reason that the Social Democrats, with regret, do not have confidence in the Ceann Comhairle. Ultimately, it's the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach that have put the Ceann Comhairle in this position. All their talk about the importance of greater oversight and transparency has been revealed to be a sham. Support for Dáil reform was only ever temporary. It suited Fianna Fáil after the economic crash when it was trying to rehabilitate itself, and it suited Micheál Martin to use Dáil reform as cover for the confidence supply that he did with Fine Gael, which paved the way for coalition of the Civil War parties. Reform is being abandoned now for a politician found to be profoundly corrupt. Fianna Fáil are back on the top floor with all the arrogance of the past, and this, it seems, is all that matters. The humility that Fianna Fáil learned after the crash, it seems, was merely temporary. The hubris and arrogance that helped collapse the economy is back. Even the tax breaks for developers seem to be making a comeback. Last Concordia, we need a different approach, a more collaborative and constructive Dáil. The challenges the country faces are too big for things simply to become more and more polarised. How this Dáil works is in need of deep reform. This must be done by agreement on a cross-party basis. I believe the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have made a mistake by going down this divisive route. However, despite this, the Social Democrats will not waver from our belief that we need more cooperation, not less, in politics, more constructive engagement and, crucially, more accountability.
Opportunity to express my confidence in the Ceann Comhairle. Fairness as a politician is essential. What we see today is not fairness. No fairness to what the office of the Ceann Comhairle represents. No fairness to the Ceann Comhairle. Only verbal abuse, bullying, permanent outrage. What we witnessed last week would not be tolerated in any workforce, in any workplace. And the pictures circulated that tell the story are pure embarrassing. What we are seeing from the parties opposite today is grandstanding, a populist stunt and opportunism. You seem to think that confidence in the Ceann Comhairle is a selection at a pick and mix sweets display. Just a few weeks ago, you were all more than happy to express confidence in the Ceann Comhairle when her ruling on the regional independence suited you. Now you believe that because a decision didn't go your way, that you can put the confidence back into display and chose no confidence instead. With all the challenges facing our country, the parties opposite choose to grandstand on this. What we have witnessed from the combined opposition, led by the Sinn Féin troops and aided by the serial hard left, is a situation where, unless the minority on the other side of the House is in agreement, we get not total opposition, but attempts at chaos and disruption, bullying, and make up complete untruths about nods and winks and even thumbs up. The deputies opposite believe they have a veto. Let me say there is no such veto. We all fought an election. The people had their say. We came together on this side of the House to form a government. You tried to disrupt the process. You lost. We put forward modest changes to standing orders to ensure everyone's mandate in the Dáil is respected. You objected to that, and we put it to a vote, and you lost. Sinn Féin's had a chequered view of the ballot box, and it has really only played second fiddle to the party's agenda. Their stated objective is to undermine the Dáil, undermine the government and create mayhem. We know their lack of loyalty to the institutions of the state. Last Ceann Comhairle, the government is about respecting the rights of deputies democratically elected to this House, all of them. We take our direction from the people who voted for us last November, urging us to form a government and run the country. That's who we take our orders from, not from Belfast or anywhere else.
Last Ceann Comhairle, at some point the truth about the past number of weeks in this House will be written, and it will show that from January onwards it became increasingly likely that a number of independent TDs might support a coalition government. What many of us did not realise was that our own standing orders made no provisions for such a grouping. In fact, they are entirely silent on the rights of TDs or parties who support the executive. This should not have been a problem for the government or for those independents alone. It was a challenge for us as an Oireachtas to resolve, because in politics you often find yourself on the other side of the argument. But instead of addressing the problem, the opposition chose pantomime. They knew full well that there was no other mechanism for this technical group to be recognised, and yet they shouted and screamed the slogan, "You can't be in government and opposition." A slogan, not a solution, and it quickly became untrue. The chair ruled clearly the group of 6 independents do not qualify in opposition, under Standing Order 170. The government accepted that ruling and proposed new arrangements in government time, we engaged in over 20 hours of discussion, including full mediation. But instead of seriously engaging, the opposition spent more time on the plinth than around the table. What we cannot allow is the opposition to tear down this House. Twice now they have tried to prevent the House from taking a vote. That is not the act of any Democrat. Our Constitution protects our right to cast a vote here in this chamber. Our standing orders exist to protect the function of the chamber, and the Ceann Comhairle carries the heavy burden of enforcing them. Let the record show that deputy after deputy stood, shouted, screamed, not to be heard but intimidated. It was a coordinated attempt to shut down the democratic process. It wouldn't be allowed in any residents' association or GAA club around the country. And now, like a drunken stag party, they cry foul because they didn't hear the call for last orders. Well, last orders was called. It's time to put these tactics behind us and get on with the people's work.
Deputy Ward.
Margaret, the last Ceann Comhairle. I understood this was a motion of confidence in the Ceann Comhairle, and yet almost everything I've heard in the course of this debate has been about ancillary issues that are not relevant to the confidence or otherwise, which is why this discussion feels genuinely insincere. And those who profess lack of confidence, I don't believe that they actually have a lack of confidence. What this feels like much more is an attempt to drag on this issue over and over again and to stop this House from doing the business it wants to do and needs to do. And any one of us who's in our constituency talking to the people who voted for us are hearing the same refrain: get back to work, do the business of the people, stop haranguing each other and get on with it. And that's what we're trying to do. But the opposite is the case in relation to what's happening. And even in the course of this debate, there's been jeering and haranguing from the other side of the House, and it's not acceptable. The behaviour we saw here on the 22nd of January last week is not okay. There's nothing to justify it. It doesn't matter how much you disagree with what was done. This is a democratic chamber that operates on democratic norms. When the majority votes, you must accept that as a democracy and move on, even if you're unhappy with that. And as the last speaker said, in the course of the over 20 hours of meetings we had in the Dáil Reform Committee about this, we were threatened essentially by other members who told us that all hell would break loose, that we would see resistance like we'd never seen before. And that's the old Sinn Féin way. We don't do that here. This is a democratic chamber elected by the people of Ireland. And what we want to do is get on with the work of those people that urgently needs to be done. So let's do that. Let's recognise that no party has a veto on what this chamber does, that no group can shout down the chair, that no group can prevent this government or this chamber from doing its business. Let's get on with the work of the people.
Ceann Comhairle. At a time when Ireland faces significant challenges that demand leadership, stability and vision, it's disgraceful that the opposition have chosen the path of political theatrics over substantive solutions. The opposition's motion is nothing more than a political stunt aimed at undermining the government rather than addressing the real challenges that lie ahead. Their behaviour last week was outrageous, bullying and intimidating the Ceann Comhairle, along with the Oireachtas staff here in this chamber when they didn't get their own way. They respect democracy only when it suits them. Their orchestrated disruption was a deliberate strategy to prevent legitimate Dáil business, not just on the standing orders though, but also on the day the Taoiseach was meant to be elected. The amendments of the standing orders were passed by a decisive 21-vote majority, 95 to 74. Their sole focus has been obstruction rather than governance at a time when Ireland's facing massive tariffs, potentially an economic war, and they caused chaos here in this chamber over the past several weeks. The Ceann Comhairle was elected by a democratic majority and has upheld her solemn obligation fairly and impartially. The clerk of the Dáil confirmed proceedings were conducted properly, and false accusations of bias and collusion are completely unfounded. The government is rightly committed to tackling real issues, housing, health and economic security, while the opposition fixates on political theatrics. Sinn Féin has yet to introduce legislation in this new Dáil term. The opposition seeks to rule by veto. That's not how democracy works. We cannot allow reckless disruption to derail this House. I urge all responsible members of the House to stand for stability, responsible governance and the confidence in the Ceann Comhairle. Let us move forward and deliver for the people of Ireland.
Deputy Corey.
Ceann Comhairle, Sinn Féin like to talk up the new combined opposition, but what in fact we are getting is combined obstructionism. a calculated web of chaos to undermine the legitimacy of government, where even staff and clerks of the Dáil are fair game. But what else would you expect from a party who for decades refused to recognise this House and opposed this state? Experts at blame and shame and little else. Opposition has already won the argument that you can't be in government and opposition at the same time when the Ceann Comhairle made her ruling. For what it's worth, it was the right decision. The new standing orders recognise the constitutional rights of all elected members of this House, government backbenchers who have as much right as members of the opposition to represent the concerns of the constituents who elected them. Since the 29th of November, we have needed a government with those willing to come forward and together to make hard decisions supported by a strong majority of TDs. US tariff policy and the decisions of President Trump may be outside of our control. In the context of global challenges, this government wants to get Ireland's house in order. It was another American president, Abraham Lincoln, who said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Sinn Féin want this House and this state in disorder to continue their own long agenda. Today I stand with the Ceann Comhairle for the legitimacy of government formation, for focusing on the issues that demand our attention and for order. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy John Hart.
Last Ceann Comhairle, the Ceann Comhairle was elected by secret ballot by a majority of members of this House. She is the first woman to hold this office. It's already easy to forget that one of her first duties was to chair the election of a Taoiseach, and so the people who took a wrecking ball to process in this House sit on the opposite benches. Getting down to the business of last week, it is difficult, as anybody here can testify, to the fact for the public to appreciate the visceral and toxic atmosphere pervading the Dáil chamber last week, and to wonder, indeed, why violent protest might take place in our streets. Members opposite have made much today, as have commentators who weren't in the chamber on the day, either in these seats or in the press gallery, that calls for votes, that proposals of amendments were clearly audible on playback. Nothing was audible in this chamber last Wednesday, just as nothing was audible on the day we gathered to vote to elect a Taoiseach, and even the most reasonable one of you has not apologised or expressed regret for the behaviour on either of those two occasions. Last Ceann Comhairle, it's 100 years almost since W.B. Yeats rebuked the audience in the Abbey, berating them, saying, "You've disgraced yourselves once again." And those words came to mind last week. And while the tagline, "You can't be in government and opposition at the same time," is an easy and actually a lazy chant, and this point was made in the Dáil Reform Committee, it doesn't reflect our evolving democracy. The truth of these episodes is Ireland elects a disproportionate number of independents by international comparison, and in other parliaments there are crossbenchers, those who waive the designation opposition or government and choose to be designated as other. And there are deputies who wish in this new formation and grouping, who wish to be in this new grouping, who voted against the government on more occasions than they have supported the government. Last Ceann Comhairle, this started 5 years ago with "Not my Taoiseach." It continued again in January with "We'll obstruct the democratic decision of this House and the election of a Taoiseach." It's continued with "We'll make this place unworkable." These are not the ways to build confidence, and these are not the ways to build an accountable chamber or a more collaborative parliament. Thanks.
Deputy Louise O'Reilly.
Last Ceann Comhairle, in this chamber we talk a lot about accountability, but we know this government made up of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Lowry group have shown themselves to be absolutely allergic to accountability. In the last election, both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael told us they'd hit a figure of 40,000 homes, even though they were told repeatedly by their own experts that this figure was a massive overinflation. They persisted with it, and even today they cannot find even a scrap of humility to admit that they were telling untruths. And their past performance tells us that they need to be held firmly to account, because they'll be off with more fibs, more untruths, or whatever word you want to put on it, the moment they get a chance. That is why the job of the Ceann Comhairle is particularly important in this Dáil, and the impartiality and fairness of that role must be absolute. The appointment of the Ceann Comhairle was the subject of some horse trading by all accounts, and of course, until the Lowry deal is published, we won't know the price that the taxpayers are going to have to pay for her to get the job. But we do know that as a result of this deal, the Lowry group got their woman in. And in attempting to ram through the farce that the Lowry group can be in opposition and government at the same time, some people say the Ceann has proved her worth to the government. My colleague, Dr. Mary Lou MacDonald, put on the record the views of Michael Lowry himself, the political manoeuvring, as he called it, that had to be undertaken, and all of that, we know, was done in secret. And the question we have asked, and asked again, remains unanswered. Is there no limit to the lengths that this government will go to protect Michael Lowry and your grubby little deal? Lowry has given a very clear two-fingered salute to the Dáil and to the people in it. Last week, we saw his contempt writ large, and your response is to give him extra speaking time. And all of this was facilitated by the Ceann Comhairle. It is patently absurd to suggest that any TD can be in opposition and government at the same time, and all of the changes to standing orders in the world will not alter that fact. To collude in an absurdity like that does the office of the Ceann Comhairle no favours, and I suspect that the Ceann Comhairle knows that herself. The actual opposition have tabled an amendment to this motion, and I would urge Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and indeed the Lowry Group to consider this amendment, which simply recognises the fact that if the Ceann Comhairle is to fulfil her obligations under Standing Order 10, she should retain the confidence of both the government and the opposition. Surely that is the minimum that we can expect. I will finish on this, last Ceann Comhairle. The label "Do Nothing Government" has been attached quite rightly to this government. But while they have achieved very little beyond pay rises for themselves and jobs for the boys, they have succeeded in one thing. They have shown that the opposition can come together and act collectively when we need to.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. What we've heard from the government benches is an incredibly narrow view of what democracy means. You could paraphrase the Chief Whip: we won, you lost, we can do whatever we want. I'm sorry, that is not democracy. Where's the space in that for the rights of minorities? Where's the space in that for the rights of opposition? And the rules which protect those rights were deliberately, consciously, repeatedly broken by the Ceann Comhairle last week. It's her job to protect those rules, to ensure that they are abided by, but instead she broke them, one after the other. The unprecedented situation of a vote being called on the order of business and no vote being granted. Incredible, unprecedented situation of the government's own proposal for standing orders not actually being voted upon and simply deemed being passed, and the agenda simply being ripped up for the day, including a government backbench first stage bill simply forgotten about. The government is right to draw the comparison with authoritarianism internationally. Creeping authoritarianism, absolutely. They're the ones who are engaged in it. Why? Because it's a right-wing government without a mudguard that is preparing to ram through a series of highly unpopular measures. You're right to be afraid about the prospect of street politics, because it is street politics that will ultimately beat you.
Thank you. Deputy Healy.
Yes.
That's Ceann Comhairle. The role of the Ceann Comhairle is to be the impartial chairperson of the Dáil, and to carry out that role with the confidence and trust of both government and opposition deputies. The independence of the office was further emphasised in 2016 when the decision was made that the post would be filled by secret ballot of TDs. However, in 2024, the independence and impartiality of the Office of Ceann Comhairle was seriously compromised by making it part of a government deal at the insistence of the regional independents and the collusion of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. It's regrettable, in my view, that Ceann Comhairle's stewardship of the speaking time debate last week left a lot to be desired and showed bias towards the government position. Two issues in particular arose: the declaration of agreement to the order of business, despite a clear calling of the vote, and also the putting of the amendment rather than the motion. And secondly, the question of cancelling the questions of policy and promised legislation, clearly beneficial to the government side. I'm satisfied that the Ceann Comhairle favoured the government position, and I must therefore vote no confidence in her. Thank you.
Deputy Connolly.
This government has pushed the policy of might is right at every level. You have seriously undermined years of Dáil reform, which the reform was brought in to make democracy stronger, and that all voices would be heard within the Dáil. You are being disingenuous and dangerous. I take particular note of the Taoiseach, the Tánaiste, and one of the minister's speeches that absolutely turns language on its head. You rammed through changes. You placed the Ceann Comhairle in an invidious position because that ramming through was announced on various interviews on RTE, etc. You made no attempt to change the language that you were going to ram through the changes. And all of the time you've added to the distrust, the growing distrust of people on the ground in relation to the political process. They simply don't trust you because you've turned language on your head. And when you ram through changes that will ostensibly give more speaking time to the backbenchers, which is far from true, then you're also telling lies and being disingenuous. And you have effectively reduced the openness, the accountability for the Taoiseach by reducing the time available to question him. You have reduced the time for order of business. You have taken time from our private members, and all of the time you have said the opposite.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Regrettably, the Ceann Comhairle has compromised the integrity of her position and her independence by involving herself in the grubby deal that was done between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Michael Lowry, the politician who was found by the Moriarty Tribunal to be profoundly corrupt. And the reasons for that, obviously, are that the government, don't care about corruption, and they're quite willing to do anything in order to sustain themselves in power. 100 years of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael isn't enough for you. Controlling the purse strings isn't enough for you. Controlling the Dáil schedule isn't enough for you. Controlling all the legislation isn't enough for you. You want to rig the opposition and undermine it and gag it as well. So you are the ones who are subverting democracy, and then you cover all that with utterly dishonest, knowingly dishonest claims like it's only 8 minutes. We had the spectacle earlier on of government TDs jumping up and down like Jack in the boxes during Taoiseach's questions. 45 minutes of Taoiseach's questions. They will be doing the same tomorrow, except for you've slashed Taoiseach's questions in half. 45 minutes gone from government and opposition, but scrutiny Micheál Martin doesn't want. That's why the government are so keen on this. Time slashed off private members, time slashed off order of business, because not only do you want to control everything, not only do you want to maintain yourself in power, but you want to gag, silence and subvert the opposition so you're not subject to scrutiny or criticism.
A government majority is a mandate to govern, but it is not a mandate to dilute and make less effective the long-established principles and rules of how this House operates, the very basis for our democratic exchange functions. Government is held to account by the opposition, and that accountability must be honest, rigorous, searching, and it will only work if it is independent of government itself. And this week, this Dáil undermines that absolute principle, not for policy, but for patronage, not for principle, but for parish pump. And as our country faces into worsening economic and political crises, our Taoiseach is performing political acrobatics to keep these deals alive. I would expect the Office of Ceann Comhairle would uphold the defence of that principle of democratic exchange with vigour. Undoubtedly, the actions of this government have placed the Ceann Comhairle in an invidious position. But last week, in my view, the Ceann Comhairle did not uphold those principles in the even-handed way the opposition expects. So I say with real regret, I can't vote confidence in the Ceann Comhairle today. I say that knowing the vote will fail, and I hope there's a way forward to rebuild trust in this House. But that will not happen if this government continues to try to reshape the rules of this House to decrease speaking time and undermine the crucial role of the opposition.
Deputy Coppinger.
A halving of Taoiseach's questions, a halving of the order of business, extra time for a special group, the Michael Lowry group. Now, just a reminder that the Taoiseach and Taoiseach took the decision to ram through last week's discussion without debate. Michael Lowry, a taker of bribes, a taker of workers' money, being welcomed back into government. And let us be clear on what the deal was. You couldn't bring him into the government because that just would not. That would be a step too far. That would be the Rubicon crossed. So he insisted on getting this special arrangement of leaders' questions, the Ceann Comhairle and the other lot as special ministers. Intellectually, he towers over some of them, so I'm assuming that's why that deal was done. I see this as part of a process that is happening in Europe. It's not accidental that the Taoiseach talked about, you know, the difficult times that we're going into. There was a lot of hyperbole about arson and so on and so forth. But it's the Taoiseach and Taoiseach and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil who've taken this decision to change standing orders, to quell the opposition, to remove themselves from. And let's be clear, there's been 2 days where the Dáil was disrupted. The way you're going on, it's every day of the week. The rest of the days have been padded out with irrelevant statements on things like diversion of youth from crime this week. You know, not tariffs, not Ukraine, not Palestine, not any of the pressing issues that you claim.
Conclude,
so
Deputy
you control the agenda, so give it up with the get on with the work.
Thanks, Deputy Coppinger. Before I go to the government side, I just want to say to Deputy Connolly, and I'm sure you're aware of it, you were accusing members of telling lies. Maybe you'd like to consider that remark and withdraw it. Thank you.
Disingenuous.
Minister Peter Burke.
Disingenuous.
Minister Peter Burke. Order, please.
Garv Mahagat Las Ceann Comhairle, I rise to support the government motion of confidence in the Ceann Comhairle and her democratically elected right as the constitutional officer to impartially adjudicate over the 32nd Dáil. On a very significant announcement due in hours from the Trump administration, which has the capacity to really impact on so many livelihoods right across this country and indeed a threat to so many jobs, we in this House are not debating a motion in relation to what tariffs could be impending in the next number of hours. We're not debating a motion on what the European response may be to that significant threat. We're not debating a motion on the capacity of our economy to respond to a significant shock that may be on the horizon. Or we're not looking at the vulnerable sectors that our economy faces and how we may need to respond in the coming months. We're debating a motion that the opposition has triggered about 8 minutes on procedure on every Wednesday and Thursday afternoon. That is what we are here at, while there are so many significant challenges to our economy. It's time we get back to a functioning Dáil and let members in this House play their parts on the various committees that they need to represent our interests and the people's interests on. We have seen over the last number of months unprecedented disorder in this House. We have seen video recording, we have seen name-calling, we have seen chanting that you would expect to see at a far-right protest. Now we have to get back to respecting this national parliament with the dignity and respect that our communities sent us here to ensure we discharge our responsibilities as best as we can. One thing, Las Ceann Comhairle, that has to be said. There has been a significant opportunity cost over the last number of months. No Foreign Affairs Committee or Trade to really dig down into the various sectoral interests Absolutely, it's your fault. It is the opposition's fault that the committees are not standing in this stall. There's no European Affairs Committee to speak with colleagues right across the European Union, the EU27, of how we're responding. There's no Tourism, Trade and Enterprise Committee to bring in sectoral interests, to advance the programme for government. This is it. Shout people down. If anyone has an opposing view, shout them down. You're well used to street protests. We work in communities. We deliver. We do the work. You shout and roar and try to bring disorder here and have our Parliament suspended. Well, let's resolve one thing today, that this House won't be suspended again. Let's ensure that we get on with our work and ensure we're delivering for the Irish people what we were sent here to do by our communities.
Thank you. Minister O'Brien. Order, please.
Calm down, Paul. I listened actually with incredulity earlier on to the arch-propagandist, arch-revisionist Mary Lou MacDonald alleging earlier about a coordinated and concerted plan by government to silence the opposition. I think anyone looking in over the course of the last 10 weeks would know that the only coordinated and concentrated plan was the opposition's plan, led by Sinn Féin, and I say this with some degree of disappointment and sorrow, aided and abetted by the Labour Party, led by the Noes in these debates, to continue to disrupt, to attack and to undermine the workings of Dáil Éireann. And this didn't just begin last week. This has been your approach right before, post the election, an election which you lost, where you declared publicly that it would be opposition at all costs. And we've actually seen what that means. For the first time in 106 years, on the 22nd of January, all of you elected by your constituents to discharge your democratic mandate and your constitutional duty, which was to elect a Taoiseach, for the first time with all of the challenges this state has faced since its foundation. And God knows many of those challenges were brought upon by members of your party over the decades. We were not allowed, we were obstructed from electing a Taoiseach. And since the 22nd of January, you've continued in that vein. This has not been about speaking rights. Let's be honest about it. This has been about populism. This has been about you seeing a political opportunity that you hope and pray that you'll be able to capitalise on. The reality of it is, though, is that this country faces major challenges, both internationally and domestically. And what you have chosen to do over the last 10 weeks is to prioritise this above all else. Sinn Féin have always been about Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin first, country second maybe, third, but it's all about you. It's all about you. But what I would say to you, the manner in which, if you park the politics, you have to be honest with yourself, Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald. Look at the manner in which your deputies treated the Ceann Comhairle last week. The level of hatred and vitriol, the abuse that she had to put up with as she was discharging her duties correctly was absolutely reprehensible. So I hope that after 10 weeks, that you will get back to do the work that you're elected to do. Yes, hold the government to account, but do your work.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. And I want to condemn the reckless behaviour of the opposition, a coalition of chaos determined not to serve the people, but to sabotage the democratic functioning of this very House. Their constant disruption of the Dáil is not protest, but performance. It is a blatant attempt to undermine the very institution they claim to serve. And now to stoop even lower, lodging a motion of no confidence in the Ceann Comhairle, attack not on a person, but on the integrity of this institution. The Ceann Comhairle has conducted her duties with fairness, impartiality and with respect for every member of this chamber. And to undermine her is to undermine the very authority of the Dáil itself. And where is the Labour Party in all of this? Reducing themselves to being the acolytes for Sinn Féin. Once a party of principle, it is now lined up with populists and opportunists, lending its voice to this cynical circus and treating everything as a joke, as we just hear. This House faces serious challenges, threats to the economy from tariffs, housing, healthcare and climate, and the people want solutions, not stunts. They expect leadership and not tantrums. We choose responsibility over rhetoric. We reject this motion. We stand by the Ceann Comhairle And we will not allow the work of the Dáil and the work of the Irish people to be derailed by those who have abandoned responsibility. It's time to move on and start doing the work we were elected to do. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Thanks very much. Oh, sorry,
Sorry, thank you very much. Lise Cianchiorla, is it myself?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're first then. Apologies, Minister Dooley, I thought it was myself.
Thanks very much, Les Cianchiorla. I welcome the opportunity to address the House on this important matter. Look, it is a matter of record that a general election was held last November. People had their say. They elected those of us that were fortunate enough to be elected. And a group of like-minded parties and individuals came together and they put a programme for government together that was aimed at addressing the important issues that face Ireland, Europe and the world in a very difficult time. Things have got complicated since. Now, look, I think we all understand that in the aftermath of an election, there can be a period that is difficult for parties who had sought and maybe expected to gain more and didn't. We've been there too. I know what that feels like. But there is an encumbrance on all of us to try to work together for the betterment of the Irish people. And we have a challenge now that's greater than we might have expected prior to the election, and it's the looming tariffs coming from the United States and the impact that that will have on all our communities and our economy as a whole. So I don't want to lecture anybody. Look, we all go through an electoral cycle and we have an outcome and we have to work through it. But I hope that we have reached an impasse today and that the vote that will take place later this evening will draw a line in the sand and will allow all of us to move on and allow the opposition to do what they do very well and did very well for the past 5 years, hold government to account, identify the positives, the negatives and often the failures. But let's try to do that in a manner that recognises the challenges that we face and puts in place the capacity of all of us to respond to the looming economic crisis that we face, and to do so in a manner that we share the problems, we work through them and we find solutions. And it isn't beyond this side of the House to look to good ideas coming from the other side of the House either. Like all the great ideas aren't the preserve of any one political party or whatever. So in holding a government to account, you can clearly have an input as well. But it shouldn't be what we saw last week. And I, again, don't want to lecture on it. It shouldn't be about haranguing or barracking anybody. And hopefully we're gone past that now at this stage. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. I rise to express my confidence in the Count Corla, Verona Murphy, and instead of having these statements here today, I think there's a number of TDs who should be on their feet offering apologies and retracting statements that they made here last week. It's a good thing the microphone didn't pick up some of those comments. They were outrageous, but they were very much heard in this chamber throughout the debate last week, and it was bullying, plain old simple schoolyard bullying. The collective opposition crossed the Rubicon last week and debased the precious democratic structures of Dáil Éireann, our democratically elected parliament that was hard fought for and hard won. And shame on each and every one of you who tried to rip that apart. And shame on each and every one of you who tried to deny backbenchers speaking time in this chamber. And shame on each one of you who's trying to depose the Count Corla. The Count Corla of Dáil Éireann, Verona Murphy is above the politics of this House. And I was appalled to hear Deputy Lou MacDonald earlier today say that, quote, her eagerness to get the job done for government, unquote. That comment was outrageous. It should be withdrawn, Deputy MacDonald, and I would hope that you'll be writing to the Count Corla tomorrow in that regard. And Deputy MacDonald, you assume that we have a collective amnesia on this side, but we've waited for 2 years to hear about your connections with convicted criminal Jonathan Dowdall. But I guess, like Slab Murphy, he's a good Republican, so he gets the pass card. But we would love to hear of your connections to him, because that is grubby. There are so many issues that the TDs and senators of Dáil and Shanadair need to get working on, and tomorrow's tariffs, which will come from the United States, are principal amongst these. But once this evening's orchestrated stunt has been dealt with, it's really important on behalf of the people of Ireland that we get down to the serious work of Dáil Éireann. Thank you.
Lascan Corla, I support the motion of confidence in Count Corla. She retains my full confidence. As the democratically elected chair of this House, she deserves the respect of all members of the Dáil. She was democratically elected. As a former colleague on the Public Accounts Committee, I know her work rate, her commitment to fairness, to due procedure and to full accountability, and I know that she will implement that as Count Corla. Regardless of whether you support the government or the opposition, There are huge challenges facing our country and indeed the entire world. The threat of tariffs on goods, the issues of global security, the issues of armed conflict, which also affects this country indirectly. Both the government and the opposition must move on with the business of tackling these issues and not see a repeat of last week. The matter of speaking rights has been subject to 20 hours of debate at the Dáil Reform Committee, and it's now time that we moved on and deal with the setting up of committees, whether it's the Public Accounts Committee, in particular the Health Committee, the Committee on Agriculture, and a whole range of committees that we need to have up and running. And it's also giving an opportunity to the opposition to scrutinise what's happening in government departments and have ministers in before them. That's all not happening at the present time, and therefore it's a priority that we now move on. We have major challenges, and it's important that those challenges are dealt with by all of us working together in the Oireachtas and making sure we can deliver for the people that elected us. Thank you.
I listened to Minister Paschal Donoghue speak. He said you cannot disrupt procedures and then stand up and talk about the value of order and procedure. But I think I can actually speak to the value of order, because in the 5 years I've been in this House, I have never disrupted anyone, I've never spoken over anyone, and I've never raised my voice. And even while listening to non-answers to questions I ask sometimes, I do not disrupt. I'd actually usually be the last person to stand up to speak on a motion of no confidence as we see it. But I do so because, as a member of this House, I am concerned in relation to the impartiality of the Ceann Comhairle. And I listened to the Chief Whip, Mary Butler, talk about this motion being about the opposition not getting its way. And again, similarly to the 8 minutes argument, it just completely misses the point. This isn't about one or the other getting their own way. This is about basic procedures and rules that are the bedrock and have been always the bedrock to the running of this House. And there are 3 key issues which have been repeatedly raised and have not been answered by anyone on the government benches. Every single week there is a vote called on order of business, every week. And one was called last week. Vote all was clearly called, as it always is. Why was a vote not taken? What was the rush? Questions on promised legislation were dropped out of nowhere. Why? The substantive motion to change standing orders was not voted on. Why? What was the rush? It was not the Ceann Comhairle's role to rush business to get to the vote on the motion. That is not the role of the Ceann Comhairle, and it should never be. I then heard Deputy Curry speak about the opposition who had confidence in the Ceann Comhairle when she ruled that the Lowry group could not be in opposition as a technical group. But where are this group? They have a speaking slot now secured alongside opposition leaders, joined with government backbenchers in one group. So in the eyes of the Lowry group, they're with a group of government, but they're not government, but they are government, and they're in a slot with government. And, you know, there's been a very dangerous precedent set here now, and the precedent is that you can run for election, you can be the chief negotiator in government formation talks, you can get jobs in terms of the Ceann Comhairle and ministers, and then you can choose, well, I'll sit here or I'll sit there, I'll be in government or I'll be in opposition or I'll be in both. And that is a very dangerous precedent set in this House. I would like to think that lessons will be learned here, not least that the role of Ceann Comhairle should not be a bargaining chip when it comes to government formation talks. The role of Ceann Comhairle should not be on the table when it comes to government formation talks. But unfortunately, the government still seem to see absolutely nothing wrong with that. And therein lies part of the problem and part of the reason we are here today.
Thank you, Mr. Today, we are talking about a vote of confidence on the Ceann Comhairle. And while circumstances have led us to this incredible situation, it is unfair that Ceann Comhairle should share all the blame. I have attended every business and Dáil reform meeting of the new Dáil, and the antics of some have a lot to be desired and leaves a bad taste in this Dáil that will not be forgotten for a long time. The bottom line here, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach of this country done what I have called a stinking bad deal with Michael Lowry and his team of the regional independents, without a scrap of paper, without a policy, without even a website. This shocking nod and wink deal that could well run to billions of euros of taxpayers' money was done. The Taoiseach was at length to say that what choice did he have? As no one else came forward. But this is truly misleading the Dáil, as we Independent Ireland came forward, but the only problem the two parties had is we had Independent Ireland had policies. We had solutions to problems. We were willing to sit down, marry our policies into the programme for government and deliver for the people. But the Taoiseach, in his only acknowledgement about our honest negotiations, was he could not meet with their demands. When the honest answer here is he did not even speak to us till the stinking deal was done with Michael Lowry was done. He knew, we knew the train was gone from the station and we were left at the station. The Taoiseach and the Taoiseach did not want to do a deal with us, as we would have stood by our principles and not caved in like the regional independents. We wanted a government driven by policy and proper programme for government, and not new ministerial positions with perks and mercs alone costing the country over $5 million. Independent Ireland were willing to, at all times to talk, at all times to deliver on housing, without dreaming up false figures on housing targets, and deliver infrastructure in a country that has wastewater tanks all over the country leaking into local rivers. Deliver on health without people waiting years on waiting lists. Deliver on education where parents would not have to stand outside shops fundraising to keep the school door open, or going to the local parish priest to pay electricity for the local school. Deliver on real climate action where people would get their warmer homes insulated within a few months of application, and where a freeze on a hungry cash grab by this government called carbon tax would freeze any increase to enable our elderly and families to fill the tank of oil at home, to heat the house, or to put the diesel and the petrol into the car to do their normal daily work. Deliver on farm payments for the close to 10,000 farmers waiting 2 years for gloss payments. Deliver for the long-forgotten fishermen of Castledown Bay, up the Killybegs and down to Wexford to get new fishing quotas, or even the bluefin quota the rest of the world have, and not a dirty decommissioning deal delivered by the last government. Delivery on tourism, where we would not see a drop of 30% in February and 20% in January of people coming to this country, and where we would have forced the hand of government to deliver them the long promises they have about the 13.5% to 9%. Deliver on our hotels and Lincoln Bread of Ireland to be open for tourism and not for iPass. Ceann Comhairle, or last Ceann Comhairle, the Ceann Comhairle, this is the reason Taoiseach Micheál Martin did not want to do a business with Independent Ireland, as our policies could not be negotiated. He wanted a blank sheet from Michael Lowry's side, full of nod and winks. Ceann Comhairle, I was not happy with the happenings here in the Dáil in the last week, and that's why I'll be voting no confidence in the Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. We're here today for a vote of no confidence in the Ceann Comhairle, and we're here also today, and a lot of other speakers spoke today about right and wrong. If you were here in the Dáil last week, and I have the standing orders here in front of me, if you to follow the standing orders, what was done right and what was done wrong. I was the person that emailed from Independent Ireland to the Ceann Comhairle at the time and asked her, and the time of recess, for to look at the process on the standing orders. I followed protocol, and I asked her. They acknowledged the email, but they never came back. By looking at the Oireachtas television, and if you look at it, within 11 seconds, the Ceann Comhairle rammed something through, even though there was a division and a call for a vote on. That is on the record of Oireachtas television. That's the right and wrong that was done here. That's what has been done wrong. That's what I'm questioning. I'm not questioning Michael Healy-Rae getting a Jonah ministry. I'm not questioning Sean Kenny getting the ministry, Noel Grealish, Boxer Morden, Marion Hart. I'm not questioning that. I'm not. Because at least they stood up and they went into government. I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning the standing orders were not followed by this House. Even though there's a record shown now from an email that we sent, followed up by an email by Michael Collins and from Ken O'Flynn. That's on the record. And on the record is that the Journal of the Dáil. We've been asking for the records of the Journal of the Dáil, and they haven't given it to us. Why? Because they're supposed to be here. If you look at standing orders,
which is in this House. Standing orders have to be adhered to. The Count Corla did not do standing orders. She did not follow standing orders. That's what I'm questioning today. That's what I put on writing to the Count Corla. I'm not here to run and shout. I'm here to follow the standing orders, and they weren't adhered to. That's what I'm questioning. Thank you.
The government has bullied through new hybrid speaking system into the Dáil. The government has created a speaking system with another designation, and they want to control that designation as well. They already have a majority in the Dáil, but they want a majority of the designations as well. And incredibly, in the new standing orders, the Chief Whip of the government will be able to control who asks the government's questions from this new group, which is an incredible situation. So we in Aontú have demanded that the government stop. We've even asked for the government to participate in mediation, but they've refused. Now, the display in the Dáil last week was disgraceful. We had grown adults literally shouting at the top of their voices to drown down the democratic functions of this Dáil. I was present in that chamber. And if the truth is known, this chamber was the opposite of dignity at work. It was embarrassing. It was absolutely embarrassing that we had that situation broadcast internationally. Now, I've no doubt that Verona Murphy has made mistakes, and she made mistakes last Tuesday. That's absolutely true. But the people who are complaining that she made mistakes are actually the people who made the environment impossible for her to work in. I have TDs saying that the Ceann Comhairle was not listening to them. The Ceann Comhairle couldn't hear anything last week because of the volume of noise in this chamber. I think it is a situation that outside of the political bubble in this Dáil, that people are furious. And I've been talking to people in my constituency, and for most people it's a curse on everybody's houses currently at this situation. The Dáil is an absolute disgrace currently. We're 123 days since the general election, and this Dáil has sat for 21 days. There isn't a committee functioning in this Dáil at the moment. No wonder we can't build a hospital in this country with the prices ballooning out of control. No wonder there isn't a house for a young person that have to emigrate to actually get a house. It is absolutely beyond time that we have to cop on to ourselves in this chamber and see can we work to fix those issues. This issue has eclipsed the biggest existential economic threat to this economy, which is the tariffs, in the last number of weeks. We dearly need to listen to the people outside of this bubble, and we need to cop on to ourselves fast. You spoke for 1 hour, Johnny, last year in the whole year.
This confidence motion arises because several opposition parties want to take down the Ceann Comhairle. She is not the issue. The problem is the government riding roughshod over speaking time and designating the Lowry Independent Group as somehow non-government and reducing opposition speaking time. As an opposition TD, I've called this out on several occasions, but some want to use the Ceann Comhairle as a trophy scapegoat. The manner in which the business of the Dáil has been loudly disrupted on several occasions is regrettable and could have been done differently. And the personalised way Verona Murphy has been treated over the last 2 months is an embarrassment to politics. I described the abusive, bullying behaviour last week as semi-feral. To be honest, I could have called it feral if it wasn't so orchestrated. Some TDs here should have got an Oscar for their fake outrage. Because to be clear, nobody comes out of this process with dignity. It makes us all look bad. And anybody viewing this charade up in the gallery, on television, wherever, on their screens, could only conclude that it's a case of clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, and here we are, stuck in the middle of a housing and homelessness crisis, war in Ukraine, atrocities in Gaza, our economy at risk from US tariffs, and an existential climate crisis. This is not right. We should get real. Gurmagad.
Yeah, let's hear. Look, there is a responsibility on every member of this House to make sure that it does not become a toxic place to work. I've been a member here for 9 years. I've never found it a toxic place. I found it a place where there is vigorous and abrasive debate within this chamber, but it's always, in my view, been respectful. However, what we saw on the 22nd of January and what we saw last week was different. The reason it was different was because people were shouted down. I have no difficulty or objection, or neither does anyone, I think, in this House have objection to being heckled while you're making a speech. It's part of the democratic process nearly. But when somebody is incapable or prevented from making a speech or running orders that are part of Dáil procedures, that's different. And that's what happened on the 22nd of January, and that's what happened last week. I know the criticism here from the opposition is that the Ceann Comhairle didn't take the vote. In fairness to her, if you go back to the 22nd of January, the criticism of her at that stage was that she didn't allow a vote to be taken. On both occasions, the one thing that was consistent was that there were efforts being made to shout down what was being said in the chamber here. That's not the route down which we want to go. If we go down that route, we're going to find politics in this country becoming as toxic as it is in other countries. Everyone in this House knows there's a certain element of performativeness to what happens in this chamber. But even if there is vigorous and abrasive debate, afterwards we're still able to engage in a friendly manner with each other. And I think that's something that's extremely important that we seek to try to retain. I'm also concerned that the members who just recently got elected to this Dáil during the last election may think that this is the normal way to behave. It's not. It is not normal in my experience as a member of Dáil Éireann for 9 years that people are shouted down. There's also another thing we have to be careful of, is that the way we resolve contentious issues in this chamber is we have a vote. We determine the issue by a vote. Lots of us don't like the results of the vote. We were in opposition for many years, didn't like the result of the vote. But if a vote is taken, that issue is determined. And if we don't respect that vote, we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult position. So I would hope at the end of this debate, when there is a vote, that people will accept the outcome of it. Because if we don't accept the outcome of votes in this chamber, we're in a very different position to where we've been at any stage previously. Like other members of this chamber, I think this row has gone on for too long. I think it needs to be brought to a conclusion. The way it should be brought to a conclusion is through the normal democratic process of a vote. And I will ask members of the opposition, and indeed all members of the House, to accept the votes of the House. And if there is a vote at the end of this process which goes one way, let's just abide by that vote and get on with their business. I'm not attributing any blame to individuals as to why we don't have committees, but can I say this to you as Minister for Justice? There is a battalion of work that needs to be done, and I need committees there. I need opposition spokespersons in committee holding me to account, and I'd ask that we do that as quickly as possible.
Last Ceann Comhairle, as I rise to my feet and express confidence in the Ceann Comhairle, I reflect on 106 years of Dáil Éireann. During that time, from its first sitting on the 21st of January 1919, the Revolutionary Irish Republic being formed with some of its members still in prison, to the 9th of March 1932, when we had that first changeover of power between two parties, when reportedly some members of this House carried weapons into the Dáil chamber only for W.T. Cosgrave to intervene and ensure a peaceful passover of power. This House has seen many crises, from the emergency in World War II, it's set throughout all of those times, from the oil crisis in the 1970s, the immigration crisis in the 1980s, the troubles in the north throughout all of those generations and the havoc it wreaked on our country, the economic crisis of 2008, more recently Brexit in 2016, the pandemic in 2020 when we had to cross the Liffey over to Convention Centre to continue this work of Parliament, and the Ukrainian crisis of 2022, the illegal invasion and the cost of living crisis that came from that. And tomorrow we face another very big challenge, Last Ceann Comhairle, a challenge where thousands of workers around the country right now are driving home from work, worried will they still have a job in the weeks and months ahead, worried about what might happen to the cost of living, depending on what comes out and what decisions are announced by the US and what response comes from the EU. And in all of these responses, and I think of all the big things that have happened in this Dáil, never during that time was a majority government blocked from being formed like happened here on the 22nd of January. Never before did we have a day like today where we have a vote of no confidence in the Ceann Comhairle. And in reflecting on all of this and the issue at hand, the one thing that strikes me is the complete lack of proportionality from the opposition in relation to this issue. The response has been disproportionate to the issue at hand when you consider the history of this House and all that has happened here before it. So, Last Ceann Comhairle, I ask for the opposition to accept the vote and the democratic vote that will happen in this House today. The reason that we are being put forward here that there is a motion of no confidence in Last Ceann Comhairle is because they have problems with how she called the vote last week, a vote which was an orchestrated attempt to not allow her to call it, where I saw a contrived attempt led by Sinn Féin and others to shout her down. So I ask for the opposition to accept the democratic vote and let us go on with the work of business of this Parliament. Let us form our Oireachtas committees and let's have an end to the coalition of chaos from the opposition.
Thank you, Last Ceann Comhairle. Were this vote to succeed this evening and the Ceann Comhairle lost confidence in the House, a new Ceann Comhairle would have to be elected. I mean, we all have to ask ourselves, had anyone else sat in that chair last Tuesday, would it have been different? It wouldn't have been. because it was definitely orchestrated, it was organised and it was determined. And the criticisms that are being made of the Councillor and how she managed standing orders are being made in the context of this atmosphere in the chamber, where everybody's listening, regardless of whether we disagree. That certainly wasn't present last Tuesday. It was impossible to hear it was impossible because it was orchestrated. Shouting, roaring by a minority of deputies, but vocally very loud. Last Concordra, I've had 5 concorders and 6 last concorders, yourself included, and every time there's been disagreements between government and opposition, and the concorder or the last concorder of the day. And there's never been a Dáil where the concorder hasn't been criticised, or indeed the last concorder, for how they interpret the rules or the standing orders. But never before is because it didn't go the way of the government or go the way of the opposition as to how either side dictates it should be, has to bring a motion of no confidence. Deputy Murphy did her best to bring order and to continue the whole business last Tuesday. She was faced with a barrage of noise. She was being criticised today for not using standing orders, but the point is being lost that those standing orders are the scaffolding around a foundation of respect, of decorum, of order. That foundation was gone last Tuesday. So when you take away the foundation, it is very difficult to start looking for the standing orders to be used to suit your argument. I concur we have to move on. We have to proceed with the business of this Dáil and this Oireachtas. There is work to be done, and we did that. And I think that has been lost. Last Wednesday night and last Thursday, we had very good debates on 2 bills that I can account for, over and back, ideas flowing over and back across the chamber for further discussion. So the Dáil showed it can move on, it can get its work done. Let's get on with that work.
Adding to the comments of my government colleagues, I would make 2 points. One is that we are custodians here, just temporary custodians of the processes that have been built before us and the standards that have been built before us. The Ceann Comhairle is a constitutional office holder who was elected by this Dáil, and it's disproportionate to have a motion of confidence if the only issue is the way in which she took a vote. She had a process a number of weeks ago where she invited submissions, and before the timeline had expired for those submissions to be submitted to her for her to make an adjudication, a determination had been made by those opposite. We are custodians, temporary custodians of the standards in here, but the second thing we are is Democrats, and the first rule of democracy is being able to count. None of you would be here, none of us would be here without being able to count, and there's a government majority here because that is what the people elected. They elected it, and we have created a number that reflects the majority of the people. We cannot operate this House without respecting the basic rules of democracy. If there is a vote, we have to respect the outcome. And where I'm really worried today is listening to the language of the Leader of the Opposition, which would never have been reflected by previous Leaders of the Opposition, by Enda Kenny and others, saying about irrespective of the outcome of the vote, her position is not tenable. Irrespective of the outcome of the vote, her credibility is in tatters. It's failure to recognise the democratic outcome of this, and it sets a tone that we will not be able to come back from. We are custodians and we are Democrats, and I would urge the Leader of the Opposition to retract her comments.
I'm delighted today to vote confidence in the Ceann Comhairle, Verona Murphy. Verona is a formidable lady, the first woman ever elected to the office of Ceann Comhairle, and despite difficulty in carrying out the duties of the office, she has always been impartial, fair and independent in her actions. Verona was first elected to represent Wexford in 2020, and since that time she has proven to be a strong voice for her constituents and for the Irish people. Verona is always a hard worker and a trailblazer for women. Having established her own haulage company at the age of 21, she finished her Leaving Cert in her mid-30s. She then completed a degree in law and became the first woman president of the Irish Road Haulage Association, which is primarily dominated by men. It is no surprise that she broke barriers once again by becoming the first woman elected as Ceann Comhairle. This motion comes at a time when Ireland faces unprecedented challenges, and yet we are wasting Dáil time on unnecessary motions when the Irish people just want us to get on with the urgent business of this House. We stand here today and debate a motion which is essentially a row about 8 minutes, and that's what it is, a row about 8 minutes, while we anxiously await announcement tomorrow by President Trump on tariffs that could have massive consequences to the Irish economy.
The agri-food sector accounts for 19 billion of exports from Ireland in 2024, with the US one of the largest trading partners. In 2023, Irish agri-food exports to the USA was worth €1.6 billion. The main categories were beverages worth €690 million and dairy worth over €800 million. Any tariffs, no matter how small, could have far-reaching consequences for the agri-food sector, which affects every single corner of this country. In my own county of Galway, the medical device sector employs 15,000 people, with many thousands more employed in supporting companies. 20% of total medical and pharmaceutical exports from Ireland are sent to the USA. These tariffs I have full support and confidence in Verona Murphy, and I'm looking forward to voting confidence in her.
Attempting to undermine the authority of this House and erode its trust in its institutions. They've chosen the Ceann Comhairle as the sacrificial lamb after an attempt to subvert the government, and its ability to conduct its business has failed. Let us be clear, the Ceann Comhairle has carried out her duties with fairness and consistency, with full respect for the standing orders of this House. The recent amendments have been passed by a significant majority, 21 votes, 95 to 74, and business is now conducted under those rules. To challenge her legitimacy for implementing what this House has democratically agreed is not principled, it is opportunistic. We cannot allow a precedent where the confidence in the chair is extended only where rulings are favourable. That is not democracy. That is subversion disguised as dissent. Last week's behaviour was not about accountability. It was obstruction. It was performance. Shouting a cacophony of screaming, spittled invective down at the chair and walking away from agreed procedure are not the actions of those who respect this Parliament. It is naked bullying and intimidation. It was ugly and unacceptable. It is time to move forward, to form committees, progress legislation, focus on the work we were elected to do. The country faces serious challenges. We have housing, Trump's tariffs, disability, war in Europe, proposed EU reforms and regulation, and competitiveness. The people expect more than provocation and theatre. Let's get back to work.
Ceann Comhairle, in my maiden speech here in December, I emphasised how I was a young woman who prided herself on breaking down barriers for women in worlds traditionally dominated by men. Verona Murphy so too done that here as the first female Ceann Comhairle of this House. She had a chance to dispense with the old boys club, the backroom deals, the wink and nudge politics, and indeed the stroke politics. She had a chance to steer the ship straight and avoid partisan decisions, as her position demands her to do, but regrettably chose not to. I have prided myself throughout my work on being able to work with everyone across the political divides, always seeking what is the common good and not being driven by partisan views or political point scoring. I can stand over everything I say and do here and previously on Louth County Council as being for the common good. Unfortunately, when it comes to the running of this House, what the Ceann Comhairle has said and done so far has only been in service to the deal the Lowry grouping of independent TDs made with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that made her the Ceann Comhairle. It didn't have to be so. She had a chance to prove that she was truly impartial, a chance to show that she was a fit Ceann Comhairle, a chance to show that the suspicions around the deal that put her in her position were unfounded. This was not done. Deputy Murphy has all but confirmed everybody's suspicions when last week, instead of taking the chance to stamp her authority and show that she was truly independent, in what looked like a coordinated move between her and the government, she put aside the rules of this House and sledgehammered through the government's interests. To compound the fact that the Ceann Comhairle sided with the government and disrespected the opposition, her office was contacted by opposition whips on the matter. This was ignored. The video evidence was ignored that showed last week's vote was not conducted correctly, sticking to the line that everything was done in accordance with the rules of this House. Every move around speaking time in this chamber has been in service to Michael Lowry and his group, with government backbenchers thrown in as an afterthought. It shouldn't be this way and it doesn't need to be this way. We could have worked together, opposition and government representatives in the Dáil Reform Committee, and came to an arrangement that suited all, as was committed to by government, to ensure that everyone had speaking time from the correct side of the House. But you all brought the guillotine down on that, which was enabled by the Ceann Comhairle. In doing the government's bidding, the Ceann Comhairle has lost the confidence of the combined opposition, and whilst we all know the outcome of this motion here today, I feel the Ceann Comhairle has a mammoth task ahead of her to rebuild the confidence and respect that she needs in order to fulfil her duties. And in the meantime, the office of the Ceann Comhairle remains compromised. Thank you.
I would just like to make the following points. I will be guided by the Clerk of the Dáil on whether due process was followed by the Ceann Comhairle since December 2024 or not. And the advice that was issued was that she did follow due process. And for that reason, I support the Ceann Comhairle in her office. I was elected here to work on behalf of constituents of Meath East, finding and providing solutions and happy to contribute to the programme for government to the serious challenges that are facing Ireland and her people. And in December, I, and I'm sure everybody else did, received the Dignity and Respect document. And effectively, what I have experienced in the past 4 months is nothing other than an attempt to bully and harass by name-calling, shouting, body language, lackeys, underlings, lads, and to top it all today, intellectually inferior. How dare you? How dare you? Case in point. And all of that makes me question the basic functioning of this Dáil. And every time, ignoring the requests of the Ceann Comhairle, the Dignity and Respect document, the very basic foundation of what we were given, and on each occasion when children were in the gallery and the words that were shouted were shame, well, have a look at where the shame should lie. Gurv Mahagut.
Deputy Nolan. Deputy Nolan, order. Order.
Have respect. You're a disgrace. Disgrace. I spent too long with you. I will be voting in support of the Ceann Comhairle, Verona Murphy. From one female politician to another female, and as one who has had more than her fair share of spite and political attacks to contend with, particularly from one party in here. I will not sit on the fence, as others have done, while attempts are made to engage in what amounts to a coercive form of democratic vandalism. To the constitutional offices of this state, the Ceann Comhairle was elected here by the majority of this House, whether ye like it or not. And the Ceann Comhairle can only retain her position through a democratically endorsed ballot, whether ye like it or not. All of us here will not agree on everything, and that's politics and that's democracy. That is the nature of politics, but we are all elected to do our jobs, and we have been unable to do our jobs in this chamber, where it's been just made impossible, as was pointed out here, because of the atmosphere and the intimidation and the toxic environment that has been created. We should all agree that vicious personal attacks, attempts to undermine and even degrade for the purposes of pathetic political optics are unworthy of this House and the tradition on which it was built. I believe the Ceann Comhairle is capable of discharging her duties in a fair and impartial manner. And I think what has happened here over the last few weeks has been nothing short of an advertisement for women to stay away from Irish political life. And it was your own dear leader, the feminist herself, who stood up and engaged in shocking behaviour in this House. Shocking behaviour. And what an example to lead by. What would that be like in government? What would the country be like? Disgrace. It is shameful. I will make my vote here today with a settled and calm conscience that this is the right thing to do.
Deputy McGrath.
I too, as a person here who nominated the outgoing Ceann Comhairle, Sean Friel, who did a fine job, and voted for him. But I accepted the democratic result when Deputy Murphy was elected Ceann Comhairle. And the treatment she's got has been outlined by my two colleagues here previously. I don't have to repeat. nothing but shocking. I had a school group up last week. Thankfully, they weren't here when this charade happened. So is this what the opposition want to call, as they've described in media and elsewhere, ferocious opposition? Some people are belittled because are angry because they couldn't get into government. They had the chance, they didn't. I want to say that I have utmost confidence in Deputy Murphy, who has, through her life, through her school days, working days, her education and her studies of law, and since she came in here, has acted rightly in all times and acted on behalf of the people of Ireland. It's time we got down to the work we have to do. With the tariffs coming in probably tonight and with all the other issues of housing, you name it, and we get down to real politics here and work for the people that sent us here and not the charades that we've had here in the last number of weeks. So I hope it will be a line in the sand and we'll have the democratic principles of this House respected. Thank you.
Minister McIntyre.
I stand in support of this motion of confidence in our Count Corlia. It is hugely regrettable that we are faced with this situation in the House this evening, a motion that has come about because of the prolonged attempts by opposition to obstruct this Dáil and the government from getting on with their business. Every single member of this House was democratically elected back in November. This government, albeit with the attempt by the opposition to obstruct us, was democratically elected, and we have had a fair election of our Count Corlia, who now needs to get on with her business. Never has it been the case in 106 years that the Count Corlia has had the support of every single member of this House. So to suggest otherwise is a complete falsehood. So we need to make sure that we respect the democratic mandate of this House and the people who elected us. The scenes in this House, as I think everybody has alluded to from the very beginning, but in particular last week, it was unedifying. Anybody I spoke to, and unfortunately we all got balled in with the same accusations. There was roaring and shouting and bawling, because I think that's the only word that can actually accurately describe what was happening in the opposition benches, grandstanding and obstructing business, which does absolutely nothing to make sure that we focus on the issues of the day and the issues that people have elected us to. You keep saying this Dáil is doing nothing. That's absolutely not the case. This Dáil is delivering for our people. In the last number of weeks alone, working with Minister Moynihan and the NCSE, they have already clarified and sanctioned 369 new additional special educational needs classes in the last few weeks alone. And work is underway to make sure that those classes are in place and that our young people and that our children and that our parents are supported in the way that they should be. So I say to all of our parents, in particular with World Autism Day tomorrow, this is a government and this is a Dáil that will not grandstand, that will not walk out of the chamber, that will not obstruct, that will do every single thing possible to deliver for the people who have elected us to do such. It's really important, particularly, and we've heard from so many colleagues, of all the challenges that we are facing, from the impact of tariffs from the US, the potential loss in jobs, the importance in protecting our economy, supporting companies to expand and making sure that the 1 million children who are coming out of school in the years ahead, that they have access to high quality jobs. That's why we need this government to get on with the business that we are elected to do. So no matter what the political games are being played in the opposition chamber, that's exactly what our focus is, that's what our priority should be, and that's what we need to do after this evening.
Foley.
The writer Samuel Johnson has observed, once the forms of civility are violated, kindness and decency are challenged. Lascan Corla, in our schools we have a policy of canoltas, kindness or civility. I'm really thankful there were very few students in the public gallery last week to witness what happened in this chamber, a chamber at the heart of our democracy. Last Tuesday, civility was replaced by chaos. There were appalling scenes of vitriol, screaming, shouting, uproar and pandemonium. Lascan Corla, I really believe this is not who we are as Irish people. This is not who we are as Democrats. This is certainly not who we are or who we should be as parliamentarians. Ska chéile warden na dine, bacór gomioch coibrú mass agus amos the gach dine. That beautiful Irish phrase reminds us we live in the shadows of one another. As such, there should be a prevailing environment of cooperation, respect and honour for one another, and most especially in this House. If there were a report card from last week, it would read, "This House needs to do better. This House needs to be better." As members who have the privilege of being elected to this House, we all sign up to the House of Oireachtas Dignity and Respect policy. One of the core principles is that we must have positive, courteous working relationships with each other, respecting the value of our respective roles. Verona Murphy, as Count Corla, is deserving of that respect for her constitutional role in this House. She is the first woman elected to the office of Count Corla, a landmark moment, an opportunity for us to showcase that no high office is beyond the reach of any woman. But rather than being honoured, she has been hounded. As parliamentarians, we must do better. We have a choice about how we behave in this chamber. We have a choice to opt for civility. Last Count Corla, everyone knows that we in Kerry, we love our football, and we had a good day. Actually, we had a great day last Sunday in Croke Park. One of the best developments in Gaelic football has been the introduction of hand back the ball, that rule that when the referee blows the whistle for a foul, hand back the ball. It is a mark of dignity. It is a mark of respect. And it has reduced unnecessary schmozzles and flare-ups and everything else. So, colleagues, now is the time to hand back the ball to the Count Corla. Respect her office and those who work in her office.
Thanks,
hand back the ball. Game on. Gurmagov.
Mr. Canning.
Thank you very much, Laskin Corla. And first of all, I want to express my total confidence in Verona Murphy as Count Corla of this House. She's a woman of great vision, great strength, and it's important that she be allowed to continue as the first woman as Count Corla here. People have talked about last week and the scenes that were in here in the chamber, and I'm not going to repeat them. Sufficing to say that the people on the ground, the people I represent in Galway East, were totally disgusted with what was going on here. When I got elected as a TD in the last general election, I pledged that I would do my best for the people of Galway East and also of the country. We have major issues in terms of housing, we have major issues in terms of delivering infrastructure, and we have major issues in terms of disabilities in this country. But I could sit on the sidelines and I could talk about them all day, but I decided it was best to go into government. With Marion Harkin, with Michael Lowry, with all the other people, we formed a document, a negotiation document for government, and we spent weeks putting it together, Saturdays, Sundays, with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. For what purpose? To form a government so that we could do what we were elected to do. And I'm proud to have been part of that, and I'm proud to be a minister in this government, and I hope to deliver over the next 5 years. But if we do not get back to the business, and with the headwinds that are coming against us from Trump and whatever else, we will end up in a sorry state. We need to unite for one thing, and that is to protect Ireland and its economy. We need to make sure that politics and bad politics doesn't take over this country. And if this situation happened in a pub last week, you'd say there was drink involved. But there were sober people here shouting and roaring and being disrespectful. It was a terrible vista for politics, and I hope to God I never see it again. Thank you.
Minister Healy.
When the people of Ireland voted, they sent people up here to work. What they have seen since is chaos, disruption, and behaviour of the worst type. Since Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the regional group, and the Healy Rays came together to form a government, we've heard all these words like Lowry's, lackeys, underlings, a grubby deal. What's grubby about forming a government? What's grubby about putting your shoulder to the wheel and taking responsibility? What's grubby about getting down to working for people? There is nothing wrong with that. But people think that if they keep repeating this, they think it will stick. Well, I have news for them, they're wrong. Labour, the Social Democrats and the others who are now firmly on the Sinn Féin leash, they're being led like puppies with their new political master. Well, if that's where they want to be, that's where they'll stay. Because I can tell you, I'd like to think that I have a finger on what's happening around the countryside. And last night, in places like Carrasiveen and Village Island, they weren't impressed with what went on here last week. And you can be sure of one thing, they weren't saying that it was a good day for politics. I have confidence in the Count Corla. I have confidence in a young girl who left school when she was 15 years of age. I have confidence in a young woman who went to England and worked in multiple jobs and worked hard, and I have confidence in her. I've confidence in a young woman who at the age of 21 bought a truck and a trailer and took out on the road to make a living. I have confidence in a woman who became the first Ceann Comhairle inside in this Dáil. I have confidence in her ability to carry out that work in a fair and impartial way. I have confidence in the clerk of this Dáil and the people who work here, whose work has been questioned. Live on television, it has been questioned. I think that is wrong. Those people are above all reproach. They're respectable people who are here impartially, and they're doing a good job. I want to say finally, what is going to happen after the vote? We've heard the opposition saying they won't cooperate with pairings and they'll do everything they can to be disruptive. What will the people of Ireland think of that when our Minister for Agriculture, for instance, will have to be working hard renegotiating a new CAP deal? What is going to happen to a Minister for Foreign Affairs who will have to leave this country? Will the people of Ireland thank the people across there if they won't pair and if they won't roll up their sleeves and do the job that they're supposed to do, and that is work on behalf of the people of Ireland and the people that are watching this today, last Ceann Comhairle. All they want to see is the rubbish to stop, and they want to see people continue with their work. Thank you.
I now call on the who's wrapping up the debate. Right, we'll put the question now on the amendment. Yeah. So the question is that the amendment be made. Is that agreed? Yes. It's not agreed. So
take note that that's how it's supposed to be done. Remember this now.
Well done, Lascow. Well done, Lascow. You should be promoted. Well done, Lascow. You should be promoted.
Amen. Yes. Those that are in favour say yes. Those who are against say Neil. Amendment is lost. And I ask members to please take your designated seats as the vote will be taking place now. It is the item regarding the confidence in the Count Cora. It's amendment number 1 in the names of Deputies MacDonald, Batchick, O'Callaghan, Boyd, Barrett and Collins. The question is that the amendment be made, and on that question a division has been challenged. Deputies for Taw, Deputies Pádraig McLaughlin and Duncan Smith, Neil, Deputies Mary Butler and Emer Curry. So on the motion reconfidence in the Count Cora Amendment 1, that the amendment be made. Taw 71, Neil 96, abstain 2. So The question is lost. We now move to the motion itself. I ask that the motion be carried. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl. I presume that the motion is carried. Vote on. The motion regarding confidence in the County Corla, the question is that the motion be agreed to. And on that question, a division has been challenged. Tellers Tá, Deputies Mary Butler and Emer Curry, Neil, Deputies Barry McLaughlin and Duncan Smith. order, please. Again, the motion read confidence in the County Cora, that the motion be agreed, and the result is Tá 96, Neil 71. Motion is carried. Now move on to the next.
Before we proceed with the business, I wish to make a short statement. I wish to thank all who contributed to the motion today, including those who spoke against me, demonstrating their entitlement to free and orderly debate. It is regrettable that the matter of speaking rights was unable to be resolved by consensus, despite 20 hours of full and frank discussion on the matter, despite my earnest efforts to mediate. It goes without saying that in the absence of consensus, dissentients are bound to be unhappy. In conclusion, I wish to assure all members on all sides of this House I bear no ill will and my door is always open. I will continue to uphold my solemn declaration to vindicate the rights of all members and administer the rules chosen by members of this House impartially and fairly, alongside the independent, loyal and hard-working staff of my office and this House, without fear or favour. Thank you. When we move now, and I ask the Minister to discuss motions for revised estimates for public services 2025, votes 24, 41 and 46. I call on the Minister to move the estimates.
Yes, I move those estimates.
Thank you, Minister. 10 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Last week I received government approval to sign a series of statutory instruments that are required to support the commencement of the Policing, Security and Community Safety Act 2024. I intend to commence the Act tomorrow, the 2nd of April 2025, giving full effect to the legislation that was passed by the Oireachtas last year to underpin the important recommendations made by the Commission on the future of policing in Ireland. It provides an extensive new governance and accountability framework for policing and community safety, and ultimately supports the work of An Garda Síochána and others to keep people of this country safe. I'm very pleased that we are now able to introduce the necessary changes to ensure that we have a modern and effective police service equipped for the times we live in, but which also respects and upholds the traditions and service to the public and the community policing ethos on which it was founded. When I commence the Act tomorrow, Ceann Comhairle, we will have a new Garda Board, the Policing and Community Safety Authority, an túideras políneachta agus sa bhfáilteachta pobal, replacing the existing Policing Authority and the Garda Síochána Inspectorate, the Policing Ombudsman, Fiosrú, which will be replacing GSOC, a new Office of the Independent Examiner of Security Legislation, and finally a new National Office for Community Safety. To ensure that these new and reformed bodies can operate effectively and independently in the manner intended by the Oireachtas, we need to establish 2 new votes for the Policing and Community Safety Authority and for Fiosrú, the Office of the Police Ombudsman. This also requires some consequential changes to the vote for the Department of Justice. Earlier today, my colleague Minister Chambers received government approval for the moving of this motion in the House today to seek the approval of members to establish the required votes and to make the necessary financial adjustments. This is vital to ensure that the necessary financial management and accounting arrangements are put in place for these new bodies from day one, and to ensure that they have access to the necessary funds to enable them to carry out their important responsibilities and functions. Ordinarily, the Dáil would refer this matter to the Justice Committee for its consideration, but as the committee is still yet to be established, I am asking deputies to approve this motion to ensure that there is no avoidable delay in the commencement of the Act and the standing up of these bodies with their new and enhanced functions. It is important for me to say that there are no additional monies being allocated here today, Ceann Comhairle, from what was set out in the published revised estimates for 2025. Instead, we are reallocating some of those funds to the correct votes in the justice sector group, in line with what the Act provides. I'll now provide some detail on the 2 organisations that we are dealing with here today. First, the Policing and Community Safety Authority. That new authority is established under Part 4 of the Act, along with the dissolution of the Policing Authority and the Garda Síochána Inspectorate. The oversight and inspection functions of these 2 bodies has been broadly merged into the new authority. This will strengthen and consolidate independent external oversight of An Garda Síochána. The authority will be responsible for overseeing and assessing in an independent and transparent manner the performance of An Garda Síochána as it relates to policing services. The objective is to support the effective provision and continuous improvement of such services to the benefit of the public safety. It is also required to keep me, as Minister for Justice, informed of developments in respect of matters relating to policing services and to make recommendations to assist me in coordinating and developing policy in that regard. As deputies will be aware, the current authority has its own vote, number 41. What is being proposed today is that the new Policing and Community Safety Authority will take over that vote number and the existing funding already in place with the Policing Authority for 2025. That amounts to €4.636 million. As I mentioned earlier, Ceann Comhairle, the inspection functions of the Garda Síochána Inspectorate is being broadly merged into the functions of the new authority. Therefore, the Inspectorate's funding allocation for 2025 from my own Department of Justice vote number 24, which amounts to €1.522 million, is proposed to be reallocated to vote 41 of the Policing and Community Safety Authority. As a result, the total funding allocation for the Policing and Community Safety Authority for 2025 will be €6.158 million. The second body being established is Fiosrú, the Office of the Police Ombudsman. Part 5 of the Act reconstitutes GSOC as Fiosrú. The reformed police complaints body will also have an expanded remit and a new leadership structure. The current 3-person commission has been replaced by a single head of the organisation, the Police Ombudsman, supported by a Deputy Police Ombudsman and a Chief Executive Officer. Deputies may recall that resolutions were passed in the Houses last July to recommend Ms Emily Logan, current GSOC Commissioner, as the first Police Ombudsman, following an open public jobs competition. She will be formally appointed to this role by President Higgins tomorrow when the Act is commenced. The public jobs competition to recruit the Deputy Police Ombudsman is currently underway, and I aim to be back in the House in the coming weeks with the necessary resolution to seek the recommendation for appointment of a successful candidate. To further reinforce its independence, Fiosrú has been given greater financial independence through the establishment of its own vote. Its new Chief Executive Officer will be the accounting officer for that vote. GSOC is currently funded from the vote of the Department of Justice number 24. The total budget allocation for GSOC in 2025 of €20.667 million is proposed to be reallocated from vote 24 to the new FUSRU vote number 46. In summary, what I'm asking the House to do today is to establish the new vote 46 for FUSRU and to reallocate €20.667 million from vote 24 to this new vote 46. What also I'm asking the House to do is to rename vote 41 from the Policing Authority to An Túdaras Políneachta agus Sábháilteachta Pobal, the Policing and Community Safety Authority, with the existing funding allocation of €4.636 million and to reallocate €1.522 million from vote 24 to vote 41 because of the merging of the functions of the Garda Síochána Inspectorate into the new authority. Vote 41 will have a total allocation of €6.158 million for 2025. As a consequence of the changes outlined, Ceann Comhairle, Vote 24, Department of Justice, will have a total allocation of €546,339,000 for 2025. I commend this motion to the House and ask it to approve these necessary financial arrangements to support the imminent commencement of the Policing, Security and Community Safety Act 2024, the establishment of the Policing and Community Safety Authority and the reconstitution of GSOC as FUSRU, the Office of Police Ombudsman.
Thank you, Minister. And we move to Sinn Féin now. Deputy Mairead Farrell.
Ara, we're obviously here to deal with the revised estimates for votes 24, 41 and 46 respectively, and these are of course justice-related votes concerning the Department and the Policing Authority. And to be honest, Minister, there was numerous things that I would have liked to have raised here with you today, but given what we saw unfold outside the gates of this building just yesterday, I want to raise that matter with you today. As many and as most of us will all know who work here, will be well aware of Mothers Against Genocide, who regularly maintain a vigil outside the gates of this House, and they continue to raise the issue of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And on Sunday night, they began a peaceful protest to coincide with Mother's Day. That's a type of protest that was happening across cities across Ireland. I know that in Galway, for example, many mothers also marked Mother's Day, including my own mother, by remembering mothers in Gaza who were brutally murdered themselves or whose children were brutally murdered.
But I do believe relevance might be an issue here with regards to the estimates debate. Yeah.
I suppose because this is about how we're funding policing authority, I think it is relevant.
Okay.
And we know that these women who proudly and strongly stand with the mothers in Palestine, we know that they were armed with roses, placards and the courage of their convictions, and they took their position there to display images of Gazan children. And we have all heard, Minister, of the force that was used against them, very heavy-handed tactics. And I think it really shocked most people to see that happen. And many, obviously, of these women were arrested and they were subjected to different types of treatment. Some of them have told us, and some of them have contacted my office and have told me that they were strip searched, and this is something that I personally find deeply, deeply concerning. And I also, one woman contacted our office in relation to a cavity search as well. This again is deeply, deeply concerning.
I don't wish to interrupt, but really relevance with regards to this is a debate about funding and the estimates. I believe what you're discussing should be brought to the matter maybe of GSOC as opposed to the Minister at this point. I'm just going to have to ask you to stick to the topic on estimates.
Okay, if we are talking
funding. But
if we are talking about funding.
Yes, but I think relevance to that funding and to the estimates, I think to be fair, what you're displaying has a better place with making complaints to GSOC.
And I understand that is happening.
Well, if that is happening, then, Deputy, I'd ask you to stick to the debate. I don't believe it has relevance.
I do think it has relevance, but I've raised most of what I wanted to raise here at this point.
Thank you, Deputy.
So I'm going to move on with other issues of serious lack of funding across Galway in terms of funding for policing. One of the clear issues that was just raised with me again today, Minister, is the lack of Gardaí in Galway, and indeed again the lack of Gardaí being able to look. The Gardaí that work in Galway do their absolute best, do their utmost, but the lack of being able to actually contact Gardaí because there simply isn't enough. So when we are talking about the amount of funding that we have available, when we're talking about the amount of funding that we have available across the state, and if we're talking about the likes of Galway, well then we need to make sure that we are obviously adequately funding the number of Gardaí that we have as well. People should easily be able to access the Gardaí when they need to.
As the Minister has said, the motion is necessitated by the commencement of the Police and Security and Community Safety Act 2024. And you'll be aware, Minister, that Sinn Féin expressed a number of concerns during the passage of this legislation about the changes, or some of the changes at least, that were being introduced, because I think we have to recognise that the lack of real oversight and accountability where wrongdoing has taken place has been one of the significant contributing factors to the undermining in some instances of public confidence in An Garda Síochána. The oversight bodies haven't had the powers or the resources that are needed to ensure that the Gardaí are properly accountable, and there was a real problem in terms of the slow pace of GSOC investigations and the extent in which complaints were passed back to Gardaí, a situation of Gardaí investigating Gardaí. Sinn Féin also raised concerns during the passage of the legislation about transparency, accountability and the potential weakening of oversight by some of these changes, including the creation of an internal Garda board, which has taken some of the powers that would have previously been held by the policing authority. I'd ask the Justice Minister to look again at ensuring that the oversight bodies, and particularly the Policing and Community Safety Authority, has the ability to conduct unannounced visits and inspections. That's crucially important in its work. I also want to point out that the fact that the Police and Security and Community Safety Act is now only being commenced has left a vacuum at a time when many communities are really struggling with issues of crime and social behaviour, and we need to see an urgency in terms of establishing the local community safety partnerships that were provided under this Act. Dealing with financial matters, I noted that the briefing document which the Minister received upon taking office highlighted the fact that the criminal injuries compensation scheme was due to be exhausted actually by the end of last month, with claims exceeding the money available, and that's a deeply concerning situation, given that this scheme is vital for supporting victims of crime, including those who have experienced life-changing injuries. And I'd like to ask the Minister to give a Dáil update on the situation and if additional funds have been made available for the scheme. The fact that this fund is running out of money so early in the year highlights a wider problem about the need for the Criminal Injuries Compensation Tribunal to be put on a statutory footing. Victims of serious crime have demanded action on this for many years, and they want the bureaucratic delays addressed. They want to see address of the lack of transparency and the inadequate recognition of victims' suffering to end. So I call on the Minister to prioritise the Criminal Injuries Compensation Bill, which is on the legislative schedule. Minister, we all recognise the important work of the Gardaí within our communities. We all recognise the esteem in which Gardaí are predominantly held. But there are occasions when Gardaí have acted in manners that are unbecoming the force, and in those instances there has to be accountability, and these organisations need to have the power to demand that. But we also need to go beyond that, and I noted in the previous debate you set out the importance of respecting the majority of decisions made in this House, and I just want to, in my closing remark, to remind you that twice this Dáil has by majority decision called for the establishment of a public inquiry into the case of Shane O'Farrell, and I'd encourage you to proceed on that basis.
Deputy Alan Kelly.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, there's been a bit of delay in commencing this. I'm sure, not your fault in total, but there's a concern in relation to why it took this long. I have no issues in relation to passing these votes. You've explained it quite well. I do have concerns in relation to how we got here. I come from the Eddie Malloy, the second version of the original report. I believe handing over powers to the Garda Commissioner as part of this and taking them away from the policing authority is wrong. And if I was sitting where you were sitting, I'd reverse them immediately. I have to be honest about that, because that's how we ended up in all the issues in relation to tribunals and everything else before. Turning the Garda Commissioner into CEO, so he'll now be or she will be the accounting officer going forward. It's very interesting, given the issues we've had into the past, that they'll now be the accounting officer. What were they doing in the past? You know, I think what we should have done is basically the policing authority, which was bedding in, should have been allowed to continue with further powers. I have to say that I remember the time of this bill and reading the memorandum with it, and it really shook me, because the memorandum said that this bill, when it was brought in, will facilitate the Minister's Department in pulling back involvement on day-to-day management of Garda Síochána, while also providing objective assurance to the Minister in relation to governance standards within Garda Síochána. Why would a Department of Justice be involved in day-to-day management of Garda Síochána in the first place? Because every single PQ I ever send to the Minister tells me that he has no role, or she before him had no role in the matter. Like, to put that into a memorandum, for me, said a lot. Now, I don't believe the Department of Justice should be involved in the day-to-day management of Garda Síochána. But there is a manner in which the structures that are put in place have to be robust enough. Otherwise, we've got to do a job here inside in the Dáil and the Oireachtas in general to ensure that standards are maintained and that accountability is there. I have concerns in relation to the way in which the board will operate. I have concerns in relation to senior appointments in Garda Síochána. I have concerns in relation to how that will operate. There is an issue historically in this country that Garda Síochána at a certain level has a certain culture. And that culture is it doesn't tolerate anybody who steps out of line as regards trying to protect the public interest, i.e. whistleblowing, making protected disclosures, or indeed just trying to do the right thing. We saw the farce in relation to the bicycle issue last year. We also have a number of other issues which I have raised in this Dáil with you, Minister, in the recent past, which I'm assured you actually went to the Commissioner on. You haven't made any public statements about, in relation to defective holsters. I believe that you believe what I put on the record of this Dáil was accurate. It was accurate. Also in relation to how AKG of drugs were found in Garda HQ, and also in relation to issues in relation to firearms. I understand the Garda Commissioner went looking for these firearms. It was a bit late. But in relation to all of these things, there is a serious issue as regards to structures being in place, Minister. The structures are not in place in the past. So these structures have to be robust enough into the future to ensure all of those issues are dealt with, because there will be issues going on and on. I'm delighted to see GSOC is gone. And I hope the new structures, if they have the right people in place, and I believe the first person appointed may very well be, will work, because GSOC was not bloody well fit for purpose. Imagine being inside in a coroner's office whereby a guard finds out they're being prosecuted. I raised it here in the Dáil. I had a window of about 6 days to raise it in the Dáil before it appeared in court, before he was charged, sorry, because I had to. That should not happen. The whole system in relation to how Gardaí in Limerick are being dealt with, some Gardaí in Dublin are being dealt with, is actually outrageously wrong. I'm not saying that people didn't do some things that were wrong, but proportionality has to come into this. Minister, I also want to raise some other issues relating to vote and how funding at times has gone skiways in relation to Garda Síochána. The effective ammunition, are you aware or can you confirm that there was quite an amount of rounds of defective ammunition purchased by Garda Síochána in 2017-2018 that ended up being destroyed at a loss to the taxpayer?